and a high of 10 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Amelia Cox.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening to you. It's 7:04 on LBC. Welcome to the programme. 3 hours of politics tonight, and we're going to start off talking about Donald Trump, because we haven't done that for some time, have we? It must be nearly 2 weeks. Anyway, the big news today coming from the United States, well, as far as the United Kingdom is concerned, is that President Trump's multi-billion-dollar lawsuit against the BBC over the editing of his speeches in that Panorama programme has been set for February 2027. So we've got a year's speculation about whether it'll actually go ahead. Now, the BBC, probably thought this case would be thrown out, but a Florida judge has rejected their attempt to put off disclosing internal documents relating to this episode of Panorama that contained the spliced version of Trump's 2021 address. Now, Trump made the speech in Washington before supporters stormed the US Capitol. The BBC has apologised for cutting together two parts of the speech without making the edit clear to viewers, but it denies it defamed the president. Well, he's claiming $7.5 billion in compensation. Now, just to tell you what that would mean, that is 1.5 times the entire annual budget of the BBC. And remember, the BBC is funded by us, the licence fee payers. So effectively, it's us that would be paying money to Donald Trump. Now, I think he was wronged. And the BBC have apologised. I think a lot of people thought he wouldn't actually take it. And I'm still not sure I can really see this coming to court in February 2027. But the BBC now has a choice. It can either decide to fight this case to the bitter end and risk having to come up with $7.5 billion, which would effectively bankrupt it, or it can enter a sort of an arrangement where there's a compromise, where they could say, well, look, we're not admitting liability, but here's $2 billion. What do you think the BBC should do? Should they fight Trump to the bitter end or come to a compromise? 0345 6060 973. Well, Simon Marks joins us, LBC's US correspondent. He's live in Washington, D.C. Simon, very good evening to you. Is this a surprise to you?
Well, it's not a tremendous surprise, Ian, because there is still every possibility that the judge in this case is going to throw the lawsuit out. The judge is just not doing that now. I mean, what the BBC was engaged in here was an effort to avoid the whole process of discovery. And for anybody that has ever watched any kind of criminal trial on American television, you will know that there is this process of discovery whereby lawyers for both sides are required to share every document that they've got in their possession relating to the case at hand, whether criminal or civil. So the BBC was saying, well, hang on a second, there's no point in even engaging in discovery where we have to hand all of our notes over to the Trump side and the Trump side has to hand all of its evidence over to us, because we're going to push for a very, very early dismissal of this lawsuit by arguing that Florida doesn't have the jurisdiction to hear the case, because the BBC says that Donald Trump has not proved that a single person in Florida was in any way aggrieved by that broadcast of Panorama, nor that a single person in Florida changed their vote as a result of that broadcast of Panorama. What the judge in the case is saying is, well, the process of discovery has to go ahead because the trial is going to begin on February the 15th, 2027, and only then will the judge begin to hear arguments about whether or not the case should be dismissed. I mean, this does suggest that Donald Trump has sort of won half a round in that it indicates that the judge isn't throwing his criminal complaint back at Trump's lawyers and saying, you've got to go and rewrite this thing, which is what a judge did when Donald Trump launched launched a lawsuit against the New York Times seeking $15 billion in damages. Just on the numbers, by the way, the situation for the BBC is potentially even worse than $7.5 billion. Trump is seeking $10 billion. So it's £7.5 billion that they might maybe one day have to come up with in order to pay Donald Trump were Trump to win this lawsuit completely. But we are still a very long way away from that. This is just the beginning, as you can tell, of what is going to be a very drawn-out legal process. And on top, of course, of the money that the BBC is risking here as it goes forward with this process, is going to be now the vast amounts of money that the BBC has to shell out to lawyers who are going to be representing it even between now and February of next year when the trial gets underway. So that's going to be a hefty bill one way or another, because the one thing you can always be guaranteed about American jurisprudence is that it's always the lawyers who win.
So basically, even if the BBC wins the case, they would still have had to fork out maybe hundreds of millions of dollars. But one question I have here is, how does a Florida court have jurisdiction over this? Surely if he wants to sue the BBC, he should be doing it in the High Court in London.
Well, that is absolutely the key question, because if you read the criminal complaint, reading the complaint as written by Donald Trump's lawyers, you are presented with a reality in which the BBC is a broadcasting powerhouse in the Sunshine State of Florida, which is simply untrue, absolutely beggars belief. And while there's lots of fulmination in the complaint, the civil complaint that Donald Trump is bringing about the impact of the transmission of Panorama in Florida and its opportunity to try and sway the opinions of voters there, I mean, there are some harsh realities. Number one, Donald Trump clearly won the Sunshine State of Florida. There is no evidence that anybody changed their vote as a result of having seen Panorama, nor is there any evidence that anybody did see Panorama. The complaint insists that that edition of Panorama was carried by BritBox, which is a web-distributed service here that allows you to peruse the best of programming from both the BBC and ITV here in the United States. The BBC says it was never on BritBox. So jurisdictionally, they think at New Broadcasting House that they've got a strong case to call for the dismissal of this lawsuit on jurisdictional grounds. And certainly courts in Florida have not always been friendly to similar court actions brought against the media by Donald Trump. But it's clearly a roll of the dice.
Simon, thank you. That's Simon Marks, LBC's US correspondent. Well, Jonathan Coe joins me now, media lawyer. Jonathan, very good evening to you. Can we start on this jurisdiction point? Because a lot of people would be thinking, well, how does he come up with the figure of 10 billion? And if he wins the case, does the BBC really have to fork out that money, given that it's a Florida court, not a British court?
OK, well, if you're starting with the issue of the figure, in America, damages are calculated theoretically in the same way as the UK, but in practice very differently. Your US correspondent rightly considered, well, shouldn't he be bringing the claim in the UK, which is a very good question. Actually, he's out of time to do that, so he's not going to manage that. In America, there are, just as in the UK, there are two sorts of damages. There's what we lawyers call compensatory damages, which essentially means what it says on the tin. And then there are punitive damages. Now, we have a form of punitive damages in the UK, but it's the threshold to get them is very high. They're very rarely ordered, and they're relatively modest. Now, the most you're ever going to get in the UK in a libel action is about £300,000. And that's a limit that the Court of Appeal set some time ago. But in America, there is no limit. And the risk that the BBC faces is what the Americans call, as I say, punitive damages, which are, again, use a legal phrase, are at large. So they could be as big as the jury wants them to be. But I want to pick up on the jurisdiction point. And I hope it's not rude as a guest of LBC, but I wanted to correct your American correspondent on one thing. I've conducted actions in America from the UK. I've walked through libel actions. I'm a UK lawyer, but I'm pretty familiar with the US court system and the law of defamation. And I've checked this up. It's not necessary for Donald Trump to show that anyone changed their vote. The threshold for defamation in America is not very different from the UK definition, which is a publication which lowered you in the estimation of right-thinking people. And that essentially is common to both sides, that there are then differences. So he doesn't have to show that anyone changed their vote. I don't think that's going to be the big issue. And I've checked this, I've checked the BBC commentary on this. Their motion to dismiss, which we call an application to strike, but it's the same principle, says that Florida lacks the personal jurisdiction. And that is correctly described by a correspondent as essentially saying no one in Florida saw the program. Now, that is a fairly straightforward issue, which the judge can take discreetly before the judge looks at anything else. He can ask that simple issue. Do I have jurisdiction? Has anyone in Florida, in the whole of Florida, seen this program? I think there's one other point which I think it needs to be brought out, and as again mentioned by a correspondent, the significance of today's decision. So where we are is that the judge has said to the BBC, yes, you can have your motion to strike, which is going to be heard in a year's time and for a couple of weeks. Hearing that would be the same kind of time as it would take in the UK, because there'll be lots and lots of arguments. But critically and very damagingly for the BBC, he has said, but in the intervening 12 months, you're going to have to go through the disclosure process. Now, in America, that is a massive exercise. And as your American correspondent rightly says, in America, the legal system does generally seem to be run for the benefit of lawyers. Dickens said of our Chancery Division in his day, the chief purpose of the Chancery Division is to provide gainful employment for lawyers. Well, that could certainly be true of the American legal system. Now, I've conducted a transatlantic case, actually, funny enough, for a broadcaster, where simultaneously the case was going on in the UK and in America. And I was doing the UK case in the day and the American case in the evening. Now, in that case, on a relatively narrow issue, it was effectively a copyright case, my client broadcaster had to produce 35,000 documents. Now, I had to sit and read those. It took me an awful long time. But pause here for a minute.
All chargeable time, though.
All chargeable time. Yes, indeed. Yep. The pension fund had a reasonably good contribution that year. But pausing here for a minute, this is why I think it's a real blow for the BBC. And they were desperately keen to avoid having to give disclosure. Now, this is why. So the fundamental allegation by Donald Trump is that the BBC exhibited bias against him. Now, I'm a great fan of the BBC. Many years I've been on TV and radio programs supporting them. Are they guilty of bias against Donald Trump? Yes, I believe they are. And that issue mustn't be lost sight of amongst all the rules and the money to do with the American litigation. Has our national broadcaster produced biased content about an American president? That's an issue which concerns us all and is independent.
Well, it does, but do they not have to prove, or does Trump not have to prove intent? Because it was clearly, this splicing was done by presumably one individual, and whether they did it deliberately or not is open to conjecture. I probably think they did. But the fact that it wasn't spotted by editors is, of course, a bad thing for the BBC. But is anyone seriously suggesting that the BBC said to one of its producers, right, edit this in the way that make Trump looks bad? Because that's quite a difficult thing to prove.
Okay, well, you use the term intent, and I'm going to translate that into the lawyer term, which is malice. Now, in the UK, you do not have to prove malice to win a libel action. In America, you do. For all public figures, and of course, Donald Trump's a public figure, you have to establish what we both sides of the Atlantic call malice. And that means that either you knew that the allegation was untrue or you were reckless as to whether it's true or not. Now, I've legaled out television programs for 35 years, something like that. Now, there is no way and I've worked with the BBC, I know how careful and cautious they are. Everything that you hear or view on the BBC or any other British broadcaster, any broadcaster, is legaled by lawyers. You'll have a lawyer somewhere at LBC who'll be listening to this program and will be sending something into your ear. So code said something disastrous, you need to contradict it, or deny it or whatever. Now, to use, let's go through the process. So first of all, on the issue of intent, you may or may not know that this was the second time the BBC did this. It wasn't the first time, it was the second time, because some months before, Newsnight did exactly the same. It spliced two bits of the speech together to give the same impression. So, does that suggest intent to use that word? Well, yes, it does. Now, secondly, you are going to have to legal any program that goes out as a broadcast very carefully, because firstly, there are the laws of defamation, but secondly, there are the Ofcom rules. Now, paragraph 7.1 of the Ofcom code says that broadcasters must avoid unfair treatment of the subjects of their broadcast. Now, as I say, I've worked in the broadcast industry for 35 years. I know that's taken very seriously. Now, it's not a question of the editors missing it. The editors will not have missed it, I do not believe. It wasn't made by the BBC, it was made by an independent production company, but that they have the same rules as BBC editors. It won't have been missed. A decision must have been made that they were going to transmit that edited version of his speech, which gave the impression, as the BBC has admitted, that he made an immediate call to violence. That was not done by mistake. So in that it was done deliberately, intentionally, I can't remember what your word was, then the question comes is, well, why was that done? Now, going back to the issue of discovery, what the American lawyers are going to say, I am sure, is so they'll look at the Newsnight program, then they'll look at the Panorama program, but they'll say that these two programs are evidence of an institutional bias at the BBC against Donald Trump. Now, I think the court will accept that, and I also think that's right. So what's then going to have to happen is that the BBC are going to have to go through for a period of years all their emails, memos, notes of meetings, goodness knows what, any that mention Donald Trump. Now, I ask you rhetorically, is it likely that there is no email, memo, note of meeting emanating from someone at the BBC criticising Donald Trump? Well, there'll be thousands, tens of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of them. And what that means is that even if they are able to strike the action out in February, which they may or may not be able to do, then the BBC are going to have to effectively own up to the fact that they did have an institutional bias.
And this is an important point, isn't it? Because this case will likely be heard by a jury. And I mean, yes. Florida is quite Trumpy. So if you've got a majority of Trump supporters on the jury who might feel some sort of loyalty to Trump, that would not bode well for the BBC, potentially.
No, it will absolutely will not. However, I'm pretty sure, Ian, and I'm virtually sure, that the motion to strike will be held by a judge alone. So that will take away the jury factor, which we don't have in the UK courts. We used to have jury trials when I started out, we still had jury trials for defamation we haven't had for years. So they do have a better chance. But my point is this, is that they will still have to give disclosure of a vast amount of material, which is likely to be highly embarrassing. highly sensitive, including, for example, minutes of the board, minutes of direct meetings with the director. So it's probably, I suspect, going to emerge that right from the top down, there was an institutional dislike of Donald Trump. That's going to be something which is going to cause irreparable damage to the BBC, even if they succeed in February in striking the claim out.
Well, Jonathan, that's been really interesting. We've spoken for a lot longer than I was potentially intending to, because it is such a complicated case, and it's important that our listeners get the full story. Thank you very much indeed. That's Jonathan Code there, a media lawyer. Well, you can see the complexity of this, can't you, for the BBC? If the Director General, whoever that is nowadays, I can't even remember who the replacement for Tim Davie is, hasn't even started. What would you say if the Director General rang you up and said, look, as a listener, as a viewer of the BBC, I'd really like your opinion on what we should do now. Could we really risk losing $10 billion? 7:25. Right, let's go to your calls. Let's go to David, who's in Hamilton in West Scotland. David, hello. What would you like to say?
Hi, Ian. Thanks for taking my call. I should probably lay on the table right away that I think Donald Trump's a pretty reprehensible individual, and put my bias straight on the table. But I work in the corporate world where commercial judgment is regularly applied, where the decision maybe to settle a case is taken even when you're maybe in the right. Now, I think that the BBC was wrong. I think the edit was clumsy. I think that it was right that they apologised for it. But I also think that the BBC, you asked the previous guests what they would say to the Director General, or you said, what would you say to the Director General if they called you and asked, what do you think we should do? And I personally think they should fight it to the absolute bitter end, purely because I think it's unlikely that he would win the case, even in Florida. I think that it would be struck down by any reasonable judge, particularly under the Americans' First Amendment rights in the Constitution. But I think that
pretty big risk to take, though, isn't it?
It's a big risk, I think, but I think not to fight it would mean that you would basically be, or the BBC would basically be lying down and offering Trump, who is, I mean, let's be honest, he's an opportunist. Any opportunity that he sees to make money for himself or his family, he takes, and I think that's purely what he sees here. Either it's a play to his base where he is standing up to these what is it called, the mainstream media, and whether he wins or loses doesn't really matter, because he's shown his base that he's standing up, but also if he wins, he makes money out of it. I just think that there are certain times where it's right to take the commercial judgment, to take the hit, to take the lower of the two losses, and there are certain times where it's right to stand up and fight something to the bitter end, particularly if you think that you're in the right. Where I completely accept that the BBC's edit was wrong, but I don't think anybody could really argue that what happened in January the 6th, Trump's speech, unedited, didn't rile up his base and didn't incite the violence, or at least add petrol to the flames of the violence that happened on January the 6th.
Well, you look at the spliced version, and that's exactly what it seemed to do. You look at the longer version, it's more difficult to draw that conclusion. But let's look at it from another perspective. Say Trump wins, and we all, as licence fee payers, we get a letter from the BBC saying, terribly sorry about this, but unless we double the licence fee this year, I'm afraid we're going to go bust. Would you be willing to pay another 180 quid?
So I think, I don't know necessarily from my accent, you can tell I'm not necessarily a fan of the BBC. I'm an SNP supporter, a Scottish nationalist. But in this issue, if I had to pay double the licence fee, purely because the BBC stood up to Trump, I would absolutely pay it. I would pay triple.
This reminds me of, do you remember Points of View with Barry Took, where there was I think it was not the 9 o'clock news, they used to do a satirical version of it, and they would have people calling into Barry Took saying, I think the BBC is simply wonderful. I would happily pay twice as much for the BBC licence because you provide such value for money.
Do you know, Ian, the thing is, I absolutely wouldn't under normal circumstances, and I think the licence fee should be scrapped and the BBC should be privatised. But in this particular case, if the BBC chose to settle with him, I couldn't continue to pay the licence fee. I think it should be fought to the absolute bitter end for whatever small part that would play in standing up to Trump and his utterly corrupt, reprehensible, self-serving self. I would be happy to do.
Well, I'll tell you what, one thing I'm delighted to emerge from this conversation is that I have found the only SNP supporter in Scotland who believes in privatisation.
Please don't tell anybody.
I think you just have, David, your secret's out. Thank you very much indeed. Right, more calls on this in a moment. Jason says, I think the BBC should pay out. Personally, I don't pay the BBC and I refuse to watch it or record live TV because of this. I get my news from YouTube and social media now and stream programmes I want. The BBC let us down, and even if I thought they were telling the truth, even I thought they were telling the truth. Right, more in a moment. 7:31 on LBC, news headlines with Amelia Cox.
A paedophile has been jailed for 18 years for abusing children at his jobs at a school and nursery in North London. 45-year-old Vincent Chan previously pleaded guilty to 56 offences. Sir Chris Wormold is standing down as Sir Keir Starmer's Cabinet Secretary, the UK's most senior civil servant. The Prime Minister says he had come to a mutual decision with Sir Chris as he seeks to reset his top team at Downing Street. And Reform UK leader Nigel Farage says comments by Manchester United co-owner Sir Jim Ratcliffe about immigration were correct. Sir Jim has apologised for his choice of language after claiming Britain had been colonised by migrants. LBC weather, cloudy for most with outbreaks of rain tonight. Cold in Scotland with clear spells and snow showers moving into the north and east. A low of -3 degrees.
This is LBC. Dale on LBC.
7:34 on Cross Question at 8. We have Calvin Bailey, Labour MP for Leighton and Wanstead, former RAF Wing Commander. Paul Scully, former Conservative MP and Business Minister. Andrew Fisher, columnist for the iPaper, who's a former Executive Director of Policy for the Labour Party when Jeremy Corbyn was its leader. And Emma Wolfe, the broadcaster, journalist and author. So they'll be here after 8 taking your questions. Now, I spent some of this afternoon experiencing something very, very unpleasant, watching the verdict being given, so not the verdict, the sentencing being given by the judge in the paedophile Vincent Chan's case. It was a horrible watch. From time to time, the court feed had to be cut because of legal reasons. And the description by the judge of some of the things that this man did to innocent young children, I mean, just defies belief. Things that I couldn't actually talk about to you now on the radio. Now, he received a sentence of 18 years. And all the time, I was thinking this has to be a life sentence. So in theory, he's available. He can get parole, obviously, for a much shorter time, somewhere between 9 and 12 years, I think. Well, let's hear from our reporter, Helen Hoddinott, who's been at Wood Green Crown Court today for the sentencing hearing. Helen, I feel really sorry for you having to sit through all of this because it was a horrific experience, wasn't it?
It was, Ian. It was a sickening day. The atmosphere in the courtroom was one of tense horror as over the course of nearly an hour, Chan's offences were read out one by one, setting out the scale and depravity of his abuse. 45-year-old Vincent Chan from Finchley, his crimes spanned over a decade, during which time he worked in a school and a nursery targeting mainly young girls. And despite the audacity of his crimes, which he often carried out at the school and nursery where he worked, he was able to operate undetected for years. Detective Superintendent Lewis Basford delivered a statement outside court.
Memories and photographs of our children when they were most innocent, achieving milestones of walking, talking, reading and writing will permanently be coupled with doubt, fear and worry about Vincent Chan. What should have been a time of safety and innocence has now become a source of enduring distress.
In court today, Chan looked at the floor as those victim statements were read out, which spoke of the burden of trauma that Chan's depravity has wreaked upon the most vulnerable, the parents of children who attended the now closed Bright Horizons nursery in Finchley Road, West Hampstead, where Vincent Chan worked for nearly 7 years, say the fear they feel about the cruel violation of their children will never dissipate. After reviewing a large cache of pornographic content found on Chan's devices, officers identified some child victims who attended the nursery, but hundreds of families whose children attended that nursery during Chan's employment will never definitely know whether or not their child was targeted by him. One of the couples dealing with the prospect of never knowing the truth shared their story with me for the first time. They told me they noticed their son's behaviour change. He started dreading drop-off time. We are concealing their identities to protect their child's privacy.
During that period, we saw him turn inward more. He stopped playing with friends. You could tell as a parent, like, something's not right, but we couldn't put our finger on it.
I think that's what's causing me nightmares now, because we handed him over to somewhere where a child molester was committing crimes. And that, I think, is a guilt that I'll carry forever.
I remember that he would even refuse to walk when we got near to the nursery building. He would just stop and we would have to kind of pick him up and carry him screaming and kicking inside.
They are now part of a group of around 50 parents taking legal action against Bright Horizons, which operates more than 300 nurseries across the UK. Alison Miller from Lead A Solicitors is representing the families and told me what they're hoping to achieve.
They really want, first and foremost, an investigation into potential corporate criminal responsibility, because this man did not operate in a vacuum. He was at this nursery for almost 7 years. He appears to have had an obsessive interest in women and girls that predated that. Families are really concerned how he was able to get a job at a nursery, stay working in a nursery for so long, behave in concerning ways towards children, record images of their children on the nursery's devices. And they think that all of that needs to be investigated by the local authority, who they believe has the responsibility to look at enforcement action.
A spokesperson for Bright Horizons has said Vincent Chan's actions were depraved and devious, and said they have brought forward several internal safeguarding audits. In a statement, the local authority, Camden Council, has said it is participating in an independent local child safeguarding practice review into the abuse, and therefore say at this time it would be inappropriate to undertake any investigation under health and safety legislation, adding that they will be keeping that under review. But tonight, Vincent Chan is in the cells, starting an 18-year prison sentence. His guilty plea means his penalty was automatically reduced by a third, and sentences for all of his 56 crimes will run concurrently.
Helen, thank you very much indeed. That's Helen Hodder. Well, I don't know which prison Vincent Chan has been taken to today, but I'm sure his fellow prisoners will give him the welcome that he deserves. Right, let's go back to talking about the BBC and their potential lawsuit from Donald Trump, because a judge has given the go-ahead for it to start in February 2027. Let's go to Anna, who's a new caller in Barnet. Anna, hi.
Hey, Hi, how are you doing? Thanks for taking the call.
What would you like to tell me?
Well, I would have to say the only thing that I agree with your previous caller on is that the license fee should be scrapped. And my opinion on this case is the polar opposite of his. I think the BBC should try as much as they can to avoid paying a penny. I find it very hard to believe that they didn't know what they were doing and that it wasn't intentional. And even on the minuscule 0.1% chance that it wasn't intentional, as soon as they knew, they should have come out with a full statement preempting a leak, because a leak's never going to end well. So with that in mind, I think it was intentional, and in any case it was mishandled. I think they should admit full liability and to an extent throw themselves on Trump's mercy and sort of, just admit full liability, promise to keep a statement pinned to the top of their website or whatever they need to do to get him to agree no damages, if possible. I think it would be very nice I think that there's a chance he would like to take the role of a benevolent, magnanimous forgiver. And I think that the BBC is funded by taxpayers.
Sorry, when has Donald Trump ever appeared benevolent or magnanimous?
Well, you're right. I can't.
First time for everything, I suppose.
It was less about the benevolent and more about everyone's quite aware of his ego. So if you could play to his ego in an attempt to not spend £10 billion, which we don't have, on LBC, I've been listening to recently us talking about renovating the House of Parliament. We're constantly talking about a black hole in finance, and do we really want to be in a position where we turn away someone and say, I'm sorry, we can't give you shelter from domestic violence?
Right, Anna, hold the front page. I've got the solution. It's just occurred to me. The next time, what do you think about this for an idea? The next time that Keir Starmer goes to see Donald Trump, Keir Starmer pulls a letter out of his jacket pocket and gives it to Donald Trump from the King, saying, Dear Mr. Trump, I want to tell you how valued the BBC is to the British people and us as the royal family. I would really be grateful if you would stop this lawsuit. Yours sincerely, Charles III. Do you think that would work?
So do you know what? I'll take your base idea and play on it differently. I think a letter from the King. I think Trump would love a letter from the King, but I would want this letter to go the way of, Dear Mr. Trump, I apologize profusely. I am very embarrassed of what our national broadcasting agency has done, and please do not take it out on the British public. And I think this is the nail in the coffin for the BBC, and that it's really, I think if the court case does go ahead and if they do end up paying out £10 billion or more, then that is really where we can see the case for scrapping the licence fee.
Well, I think the BBC would cease to exist at that point because they would effectively be bankrupt. Anna, thank you very much. James is in Tower Hamlets. James, good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Dale. Thank you for taking my call.
By the way, you can call me Ian. Only you, though.
Thank you, Ian. I'll do so. I'm a bit nervous, so just bear with me. I just think broadly, I think we're looking at this case from totally the wrong way. I don't think Mr. Trump is particularly interested about the BBC. Any slander, if it was proved, wouldn't result in a great deal of damages because it's unlikely that it influenced a great deal of USA voters in the UK, which is where the alleged defamation took place. I think what he's really after, and the key to it, is that he wants discovery. And I think what he's looking for in the documents is any links between the BBC, the New York Post, and as not the New York Post, the New York Times and the Washington Post. If he was to find such damning information, then given the difficulty there is to get a successful defamation case in the United States, I think he would then go after his principal political opponents, namely those two newspapers I've just mentioned.
Well, it's a point of view. I mean,
I say no more. Looking at it from Trump's point of view, even if he were to win, what defamatory damages was done to Mr. Trump's reputation when the defamation took place, or alleged defamation took place in the UK? We don't have a vote. Why would you? And given the high bar why would you think he would win the case? And I think he knows that, because I don't think that's what he's after.
Well, I think the key thing that we've learned today actually is that this could well be a case that's heard by a jury. Now, I'm all in favour of jury trials, but if you've got an American president who, I mean, even if you're not a Republican, there is this innate respect for the presidency in the United States, which I think would influence a jury to an extent. And if you've got an American president against a foreign broadcaster, and you have a jury made up of people who might be card-carrying Republicans for all I know, I think that's quite a risk for the BBC. I'll say no more. James, thank you very much indeed. Howard in Llandudno says, another person saying that the BBC is funded by taxpayers. I haven't said that. Or if I have, I didn't mean to, because I know I've said at least twice that it's funded by licence fee payers. So Howard continues, this is not true. It's funded by licence fee payers. No TV, no licence fee. We also have BBC Radio, which is free of charge at the point of delivery. There used to be a licence for radios, and there is a suspicion that might come back. And it says, and there are no commercials on it. Have you ever listened to BBC Radio? How you can say there are no commercials on it with a straight face, I do not know. Because, I mean, there's one particular station which has the letter 5 in it. I mean, it's nothing but commercials for their other programmes. I reckon about 10 minutes an hour they spend doing that, actually longer than we do. Anyway, end of rant. If you don't own a TV and therefore don't pay a TV licence fee, you still get BBC Radio free, says Howard. Well, that is strictly speaking true, but I think it's rather irrelevant to this point. It's 7:47.
LBC This Morning on Nick Ferrari at Breakfast.
So many people want to have your say on what Sir Jim Ratcliffe has said. And the Prime Minister, indeed, in part of them, saying that he needs to apologise for this part of the interview with Sky News.
The UK's been colonised by immigrants.
Sir Mel Stride, Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Well, I wouldn't use that phraseology. I wouldn't say colonised, but he is certainly speaking to something that is of huge concern.
Martins and Rotherhithe.
I do agree with the sentiment of what he was saying. I got off the train at Seven Sisters. For that 20-minute walk, I did not hear one person speak English.
Sarah in Croydon.
A lot of people that are educated here will go abroad to be doctors and nurses because they get paid better abroad. But then the ones from less developed countries will come here.
Nick Ferrari at Breakfast. Back tomorrow morning from 7. Listen on our free Global Player app or the LBC app. Sunlight's Dale. Text 84850. This is LBC.
It's 10 to 8 on LBC. Don't forget cross question coming up. If you'd like to put a question through, 0345 6060 973. Catherine's in Muswell Hill. Hello, Catherine.
Hello, Ian. I think it's really important that this doesn't become a conversation about who likes or doesn't like the BBC or having to pay a licence fee. You know, that's a separate conversation, and it's one that is, you know, aired every now and again. But this is not the forum for that. This is about whether there is a legitimate case being brought by Donald Trump against the BBC. And you had really interesting discussion about that from Simon Marks and your other guest, who I can't remember who that was, but the media lawyer, I think he was, who was really interesting. And it's clear that there's a lot of road to travel before the case actually comes to court. But listening to a lot of your callers, what seems to be in the forefront of their thinking is, well, I don't like the BBC. Or
yeah.
And that's what prompted me to ring, because I wasn't going to ring on this subject.
No, I think you're right. You make a really good point. I think if you are a Trump fan, you automatically think that the BBC should have to pay up and that Trump should take it all away. And if you hate Trump, you're automatically going to be on the side of the BBC. Now, I've tried to look at this as much as I can from an independent point of view, and I think Trump does have cause to be aggrieved by what the BBC did. Do I think he should be taking them to court for $10 billion? No, I don't.
I agree with you. And being aggrieved and defamation are two very separate things. And it's really important that people can understand that there is a difference. You know, I'm aggrieved most days of the week, but I don't go to court for defamation most days of the week.
No, you ring me.
Not most days of the week, Ian.
No, that is true. But you could.
I could. I might have other things to do, but not tonight. It's really important that people just take take a step back from, for some reason, the BBC and Trump seem to evoke and elicit people's emotional passions in some way. And you really have to take a step back and think, is there a legitimate claim here for defamation and reputational damage? And my answer to that is, no, I just don't see that there is. He won the election. I haven't seen. I can see why the judge has ordered discovery. I can see that, but I cannot. I very much hope that Simon Marks is right and that there's a lot of road to run.
Well, the thing is, Catherine, what we both have to recognise is that Simon Marks is always right. Catherine, we have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed. Mike says, I have worked for both BBC Radio 1 and Radio 2, and I can confirm they are one big, long advert. Not in the way you would think. A lot of the former staff and artists that they push are all on contract. It's not impartial in the slightest. Now, this evening it's been confirmed that the country's top civil servant has left his job, or rather been forced out. Sir Chris Wormold had only had the job of Cabinet Secretary for 14 months and has now become the shortest-serving Cabinet Secretary of all time. His departure, of course, follows Morgan McSweeney quitting as Sir Keir Starmer's Chief of Staff on Sunday, and then the Director of Communications, Tim Allen, leaving the following day. LBC's Deputy Political Editor, Aggie Chambray, explains why the top civil servant has become part of this Downing Street exodus.
I think he's going for a couple of reasons. I think he's going because there had been speculation for a long time that Sir Keir Starmer didn't have complete confidence in him. And of course,
he appointed him, of course.
Yes, he absolutely appointed him.
There's a pattern here, isn't there?
Well, and it follows, of course, the appointments of two other people, Lord Peter Mandelson as US Ambassador and Lord Matthew Doyle to the House of Lords, despite their association with sex offenders. And what is interesting, Ian, there's plenty of interesting things about this story, is they've published their letters that they've sent to one another. And in Sir Chris Wormold's letter, he writes, I want to place on record my sincere thanks to the extraordinary civil servants, public servants, ministers and advisors that I have worked with. Who's missing from that list of thanks?
Now, let me think.
Not thanking the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister, though, does thank him. He said, I'm very grateful to Sir Chris for his long and distinguished career of public service spanning more than 35 years and for the support he's given me over the past year. I've agreed with him. He will step down as Cabinet Secretary today. And then the press release goes on to say, for an interim period, the responsibilities of the Cabinet Secretary will be shared between Catherine Little, who is the Permanent Secretary at the Cabinet Office, Dame Antonio Romero, who's the Permanent Secretary at the Home Office, and James Bowler, who's the Permanent Secretary at the Treasury. But the thing is, Ian, there was a lot of speculation that Antonio Romero was effectively going to be given this role, and Sir Chris Wormold was going to be removed from it. What's possibly changed overnight is an interview that Sir Simon MacDonald, the former Permanent Secretary at the Foreign Office, and actually Antonio Romero's boss, gave this extraordinary interview where he said that ditching Chris Wormold was extraordinary. He said he wanted to talk to Number 10 basically about the lack of a process, and also talked about 2017 allegations against Antonio Romero. They were, though, dismissed without a case to answer by the Cabinet Office.
Well, I think there's a number of things to pick out of that. The fact that there's going to be a job share for Cabinet Secretary between three people in the interim. Now, that could be months. That is... it's going to mean a complete mess at the heart of the system. No one's going to know who's in charge, who to go to. There's absolutely no precedent for this since the job was created by Lord George in World War I.
1916.
Well done. And, I mean, it's yet another unforced error by the Prime Minister, it seems to me. And I thought, Kemi Badenoch has been speaking about this. And, you can't really disagree with what she said, can you?
No, and what she said is the Cabinet Secretary is the latest person Sir Keir Starmer has thrown under the bus to save his own skin, and also asked when was the last time there was not a Cabinet Secretary, a Director of Communications and a Chief of Staff. We've also, in the last few moments, heard from Ed Davey, who said very worried about who Keir Starmer will blame when there is literally no one else left in number 10. And obviously, your opponents are always going to criticise you. That's how politics works. I think what should be worrying for the Prime Minister is this is also something that people on his own side are saying effectively behind his back at the moment.
That's Aggie Shornbray, our Deputy Political Editor. Right, let's finish off the hour with James in Gravesend. Hello, James.
Hello, Ian. How the devil are you?
I'm terribly well. You've only got about a minute.
Yes, okay. I'm going to be as quick as I can. With the BBC, I'm looking at what was the reputational harm done to the President of the United States? Because when we're looking at these kind of things, you have to look at the level of reputational harm, okay? BBC are responsible for the actions of their employees, but I'm saying if this occurred in this country, if these edits were done in this country, surely it should be heard in a British court under British law.
Well, he's run out of time. There's a statute of limitations on libel cases, I think.
Right then. So, as you know, in America, it's unlimited fines, okay?
Yep.
So I think he's going to go for the BBC, and he's going to take as much money from the British the taxpayer, because there's no difference between the taxpayer and the licence payer.
There is actually, but we've only got 20 seconds, so we can't go into that.
And quickly, after 20 seconds, I think the Prime Minister really needs to go, rather than blaming everybody else, saying, not my fault, Cov.
What's the Prime Minister got to do with it?
Nothing to do with Donald Trump, but I was just listening to your previous speaker.
Oh, right. Okay.
And I'm saying, Kemi's correct. Okay.
James, thank you very much. Right, cross question coming up in a few moments' time. Calvin Bailey, Labour MP for Leighton and Wanstead. He's former RAF wing commander. Paul Scully, former Conservative MP and Minister. Andrew Fisher, columnist for the iPaper, former advisor to Jeremy Corbyn. And Emma Wolfe, broadcaster, journalist and author. They'll be here taking your questions in just a couple of minutes' time. The number to call, 0345 6060 973. You can text 84850. And of course, we'd love you to watch us on Global Player, the LBC app, or the LBC YouTube channel, all coming up in just a couple of minutes' time after the LBC News headlines.
On your radio, on the LBC app, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock, a paedophile's been jailed for 18 years for using his jobs at a nursery and a school to upskirt girls and molest young children. 45-year-old Vincent Chan pleaded guilty to 56 offences in a campaign of abuse in North London, described as every parent's worst nightmare. Hundreds of families will never know for sure if he targeted their child. Detective Superintendent Lewis Basford read a message from parents outside court.
The fear we feel about the cruel violation of our children will never dissipate. We are unable to look back on our children's earliest years with peace, certainty and optimism.
A ruling under the Obama administration that concluded greenhouse gases are a threat to public health is being rolled back by Donald Trump. The US president says he's terminating the finding to make cars cheaper. Sir Keir Starmer's lost another senior member of his team. The Cabinet Secretary, Sir Chris Wormold, the UK's most senior civil servant, is leaving number 10 by mutual agreement. And more than 1.4 million NHS workers will receive a 3.3% pay rise from April. The Health Secretary says that's above the forecast for inflation for 2026 to 27, but health unions disagree. In the city, the FTSE 100's closed down 69 points at 10,402. The pound buys $1.36 and €1.14. LBC weather: outbreaks of rain tonight. Cold in Scotland with snow moving into the north and east. A low of -3. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Daryl Jackson.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, very good evening. It's 2 minutes past 8 on LBC. Let me tell you who's on our panel on Cross Question tonight. To my left, Andrew Fisher, columnist for the iPaper, former Executive Director of Policy for the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn. Next to him, Calvin Bailey, Labour MP for Leighton and Wanstead. And to my right, Emma Wolfe, broadcaster, journalist and author. Next to her, for the second evening in a row, we have an empty seat. But it is going to be filled this evening because Paul Scully will be joining us, former Conservative MP and Minister. There's been a lot of problems on South West trains apparently this evening, but he's in a cab, so he'll be here very, very shortly. They are expecting your questions on 0345 6060 973. You can WhatsApp your question on that number as well if you can't phone in. And of course, you can watch us on Global Player, the LBC app, and the LBC YouTube channel.
Call 0345 6060 973. Text 84850. Cross question. Watch live on both Global Player and the new LBC app. This is LBC.
Right, Scott in West Hampstead has the first question. Is Sakia's reset of his Downing Street team this week quite simply an exercise of rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic? Calvin Bailey, I'm sure you were looking forward to answering lots of questions along these lines.
I was hoping we were through this, but what I would say is, clearly last week there was kind of a seismic event, which brought the party to a head and really quite to a moment. Monday evening, we saw the Prime Minister come in and be very powerful in the way that he spoke about resetting the party and the relationship with the party. And some of that work had been going on. I think the kind of final piece that needed kind of picking out was Mr. Morgan or Morgan McSweeney.
Well, he wasn't the final one, though, was he?
No, he wasn't. But there is, because the reshaping of what the number 10 operation looked like is going to take a period of time. We've seen the behaviours change. We've already. Yes, we have. That's me telling you that.
How?
They're much more engaging. Look at his response today to the racist comments of Mr. Radcliffe. Like, he was straight onto those in a way that perhaps he had been constrained to previously. It would have taken him a couple of days to get that out. And we're quite grateful that he was very powerful and very direct with getting that out. So there is some work to do, but a reset is going to require some consideration.
What has the Cabinet Secretary done to be sacked? Because he has been sacked. I mean, he's resigned, but we know it's resigned in inverted commas.
Well, I don't know. That's not my job to know, and that's an internal matter, isn't it? So, and they've published publicly their letters, which I know you've already sort of broken down for the public. I think what's important now is that there is a proper process for appointing other people, and that the organisation that replaces it is materially different to the one. So if you look at the one that replaced, so one of the things that was levelled at him was there was a boys' club in number 10 where you've got an abundance of women in powerful positions at the moment, and they're really impressive people as well, which is what's really important to see. And so seeing Vidya and Jill, who have been active and out and about around the estate, is really important signalling.
But Kemi Badenoch tweeted tonight, and you're obviously not going to agree with her on most things, but I think she does make a good point when she says that for the first time in history, we have a government with no cabinet secretary, no chief of staff, and no director of communications. We're not being governed.
Well, clearly we are. But I mean, if she's talking about people taking leave of absence, then she's got an equivalent number of people taking leave of absence from her front bench and migrating up into reform. So
but you can't really draw that analogy.
Well, those people are leaving by choice. There's I hope there's some element of design of what's happening at the moment. The country is being governed. The work continues. We've had a couple of weeks. We've seen bills coming out today about under 16 electoral reform. Last week we saw the cancer plan come out. We've seen a whole load of local government legislation that's really powerful, talking about SEND and the things that really matter to people. So government is happening. It's just unfortunate that we're not getting the focus and attention on the real changes that are going to improve people's lives.
Did you at one point on Monday think he was a goner?
I think if we're honest, everyone would have thought or felt slightly uncomfortable in the position that we were in. But in the way that he's very skillfully handled our international matters, I think he very skillfully handled the position that he was in, and we saw him at his best.
Emma Wolfe.
Well, I congratulate you, Calvin, on trying your hardest there to defend Keir Starmer. The wheels haven't just come off this government. The fan belt has snapped and the whole internal combustion engine is about to explode. He's lost 2 chiefs of staff, cabinet secretary, going back a little bit, his deputy and his housing secretary. He's had his chancellor sobbing on the benches behind him in the House of Commons. We've been on resignation watch for about a week and it was quite fun at the beginning. But now this is just getting ridiculous. This is absolutely 99% of the energy and the focus behind number 10, which should be going into running the country right now, is about crisis management, isn't it? And about appointing new people that can spin it a different way, and new media people and new comms people. And it's absolutely shocking. And the lack of judgment. Keir Starmer keeps saying, I've done the right thing. I've taken action. I've removed this peerage or whatever. It's not about taking action when you're called out by the press or when the press catch up with you. It's about showing that judgment beforehand so that you don't appoint someone like Peter Mandelson to our most important ambassadorial position in the world, so that you don't then appoint, after we've all seen the story in the Sunday Times, for example, you don't then appoint someone like Matthew Doyle to the peerage. It discredits the House of Lords. It discredits the entire government. If you talk to people on the streets, the trust in politics is at absolute rock bottom, and I think there's real anger at the dysfunctionality of this government right now, and people are struggling like mad. And it's a cliche to talk about the cost of living, but when we know that we're paying the salaries of these men, and it is men who are earning a lot and then being paid off these huge payouts that we see for failure, and people are genuinely struggling to pay their bills, I think there's a huge amount of anger and disillusionment and disengagement with politics. So I think it's really, really damaging.
Okay, and Andrew Fisher.
I think Scott asked, is this reset shuffling the deck chairs on the Titanic or rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic? The Titanic didn't have enough lifeboats, did it, at the end for everyone? And it does begin to feel a little bit like that. Look, it's clearly a mess at the moment and things aren't going well. But in some ways, I think, I speak as a former advisor in politics. You're replaceable. You're not the one elected. There's no political gurus, and those who think they are tend to be the furthest from it, in my experience. All of these people are replaceable. He will find another director of communications. He will find another chief of staff. He's got interim chief of staff who are perfectly competent people.
Very, very competent.
It's not relevant. I think the things that matter are, look, is the government making the country better? And people don't feel it is. And that's what's undermining his popularity or feeding his unpopularity.
But I think it is true to say that in, 18 months, 19 months, there have been a remarkable number of people.
5 director of communications for a start.
And you look, Sue Gray, she was fired. Then Morgan McSweeney takes over. Now we're going to have I don't know if either of those two are going to take over permanently, but there'll be now number 3. Whatever the chaos of the last Tory government was, and there was a lot of it, I don't remember any Prime Minister in my adult lifetime going through advisors at a rate of knots like this. And that has to say something. What does
Johnson had to get rid of Dominic Cummings, didn't he? And there were a few others that went, I think. And obviously Liz Truss didn't last long enough to get through anyone, really. So it's hard to compare. But
she did have 2 chancellors, to be fair.
She did have 2 chancellors in 40-something days. So, look, it's... I think the substantial issue is, look, clearly there's issues there. And, I often think, advisors advise, politicians decide. Ultimately, the problem is the politician. They're the one who appoints the advisor in the first place. They're the one who can get rid of them. They're the one who can ignore their advice.
Calvin, that's a very good point, isn't it? The buck always stops with the Prime Minister. He's made the appointments and he seems to keep making mistakes.
Well, I think to answer the question earlier, things have stopped and that there hasn't. And a lot of what so I was in number 10, and there is a buzz in there going on at the moment because they're doing a lot of work, mostly security-related work, in the run-up to the Munich security conference, which is over the next couple of days. Work is continuing at pace. The problem is that these things detract from the narrative of what's going on, and we know that it's taken some time for us to legislate or put the legislation in place to make the improvements that people are going to start feeling. But the difference between this and what we saw with the Tory government was these are backroom changes. We haven't seen tell me how many health secretaries were there? How many chancellors were there? Prime ministers? That's front of house.
Yeah, that's 14 years.
But no, it wasn't. It was.
The last 5 years.
Fine, and I'm not diminishing that.
But there is a difference in that the focus on some of these changes happens inside our little Westminster world. We're only by Westminster. We'll discuss it. No one will care. It doesn't make any.
People
it
do
doesn't
care
make a difference outside. They will care about some of. I understand the Mandelson thing is that is a big issue, and I agree with what you've said about men and about how some of these male behaviours manifest in society and decision making and the exercise of power. That I all agree with. But
what about
when you come in as an advisor? You are there to be exchanged when you're.
But when you're a prime minister who seems to have in 19 months reset his government at least 4 times, and this is a 5th time, when you say you're going to act differently, things are going to come together. You're going to be different, and then you put in a performance like he did at PMQs, the most bad-tempered, sort of insulting kind of performance, particularly like his answer to Ed Davey, and then almost. Having a contempt of court for a former DPP in his answer to Stephen Flynn. I mean, you do think, is this really any different? Because I could see all your faces on the back benches, and at the beginning of it, you're all understandably cheering him, wishing him well, and then as PMQs went on, the atmosphere just plummeted because people didn't like what they were seeing. Do you accept that as a description?
I was elsewhere during question time. So, I was in Scotland. I can reflect on that. What I will know is there has been a significantly more upbeat feeling in amongst the MPs. He's had a significant engagement with the women of the party through their PLP, and he's been out and about, and his advisors have been around over the last couple of weeks, and people feel as though something has changed.
Well, with respect, why is Lisa Nandy then on the airwaves talking about the culture and the misogyny, dripping through Number 10? I mean, that's today. What about Wes Streeting talking about no plan for growth? These are senior ministers.
Well, to be fair, he wasn't. That was in his WhatsApp message to Peter Mandelson. Yeah. He wasn't talking about that. But obviously not comfortable for him.
But these are the realities. I mean, you're saying, we're talking about the bubble, and what the reality is, what people care about is what's actually happening. Have things changed? Have things improved in 18, 19 months? And I don't think people feel that at all. In fact, most people are saying they feel quite the opposite, that taxes are up, that they can't afford their business rates, that businesses in their local high streets are closing down. I mean, I think we can set aside all the bubble stuff if things are changing, if things are improving, if people feel that everyday lives are better. Yeah, they're not particularly bothered who Chris Wormold is, for example, but do they feel better about, I don't know, their local schools, about their kids, about can they get a GP appointment?
Or can they
all the things that we talk about.
So we've seen waiting lists fall. They've fallen significantly. We've seen.
But people's reality, people's lived experience is not that they're being seen more quickly. It's actually that they're being moved from one list to another, and the figures are being manipulated or even massaged.
That's not the case. We can't. We have to be reasonable. The figures are. Waiting lists are coming down. We are seeing some material changes. Kids. I walked past a school this morning. Proudly was talking about free school meals on the gate.
I took my 5-year-old into school today.
How that impacts.
Yeah, we hear a lot about
£150 off bills. No rises in train fares. A freeze on prescriptions. All of these things will start to bite. They will start to have some impact on people, and they will start to make a difference. Right now, we're in February. We're in the middle of a psychodrama that's largely the purview of people in Westminster. These things will start to bite, and start in 26. People will start to feel a difference.
Paul Scully joins us. Nightmare journey?
It has been a nightmare journey. You're talking about train fares not going up. Well, yes.
Let me just read the question to you that we've all been talking about. Is Sir Keir's reset of his Downing Street team this week quite simply an exercise of rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic?
I was just about to because I was listening to it in the cab, so I was just about rushing. Deck chairs, absolutely. Totally. I'm afraid it is. I'm sitting there. Of course, I'm a Conservative. Of course, I'm an ex-minister. But I'm trying to run a business, and I'm from outside looking in on this, thinking, oh my goodness. We've just had 5, in particular, difficult years, Conservatives making mistakes on top of a lot of very difficult events. And Keir Starmer has said, right, we're going to hit reset. I think Harriet Harman was trying to say, here's the adults finally back in government. And he's done anything but, I'm afraid. The guy's an empty suit. I'm sorry to say that. I like Keir Starmer. We were elected at the same time. But he says I'm taking responsibility. He's apologised, but he is throwing person after person under the bus, and this is just no way to govern this country. We are still in difficult times. Cameron was talking about all of the other things. I heard you talking about votes for 16, which I'm not particularly in favour of, but for goodness sake, can we get to some growth? Can we have these things that we need to then be able to reduce taxes, to then be able to reduce cost of living, rather than continuing psychodramas here in Westminster with things that are utterly avoidable?
Right, we will let you catch your breath after your terrible journey, and we'll take some more questions from our listeners in just a moment. You're listening to Cross Question on LBC. It's 18 minutes past 8.
This is LBC. Nothing Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
8:35 on LBC. We have Calvin Bailey with us, Labour MP for Leighton and Wanstead, Paul Scully, former Conservative MP and Minister, Andrew Fisher, columnist for the iPaper, former advisor to Jeremy Corbyn, and Emma Wolfe, broadcaster, journalist and author. Right, David is in Camden. David, hi, what would you like to ask?
Hello, is it fair that nurses are getting a below inflation pay rise, whereas the last couple of years doctors have had an above inflation pay rise?
Well, the government has announced that around 1.5 million NHS workers across England and Wales will get a 3.3% pay rise in the next financial year. Last year, resident doctors were awarded a 5.4% increase, while nurses were only given a 3.6% rise. Emma.
This is a really tricky one because we all love the NHS, and I think nurses and doctors, on the whole, do an amazing job. Absolutely. I think of the nurses who cared for my father when he was dying and how they looked after us all that final week. And I think the NHS absolutely, they work above and beyond what they are kind of, paid to do. So I think that any spare money that's going, if they find any down the back of the sofa in number 10 or number 11, I think that should absolutely be going to the NHS, not to middle management and not to consultants and not to rebranding and not to posters telling us to be kind and respect my pronouns and all of that, but going to the frontline staff who are caring for patients.
Calvin.
Go again with the question.
Okay. Is it fair that nurses will get a below inflation pay rise, but doctors get an above inflation pay rise?
I think the position that the doctors have been arguing from is that the impacts of the austerity years upon their pay have resulted in a significant degradation of their pay. Has been a sizable degradation of their pay.
The nurses could argue that too.
And they could. But the consequences to our doctors has been that we are seeing a flight of doctors, and there are some specific challenges for the doctors that mean that they have been able to argue for a greater than normal remuneration to recover their position. Now, we have increased the national living wage. We've seen wage increases for our lower earners, and when we came into power, part of covering the black hole was actually meeting the recommended pay rises that were put to the government, and that's an important thing that we need to keep doing at the moment, is making sure that those people that work in the service of our nation and in the NHS receive the pay rises that they're deserving of. And where we do have these exceptional areas of service that are impacted in the way that doctors have, then at those moments we choose to try and address those exceptionally.
But, I mean, Whipps Cross is in your constituency, isn't it? The hospital. I had to go to A&E there once, but that's another story. You presumably go visiting the hospital. If a nurse comes up to you and saying, look, I understand the pressures on public finances, but how can you justify giving one of the resident doctors who might be on $60,000 a year a bigger percentage pay rise than me, and I'm on $27,000? I mean, it's a difficult conversation, isn't it?
Of course it is, and the similar is true across the military, because you can frame this slightly differently. So in the military, you'll see when you lose people with key specialist skills like pilots or aircrew, then people throw retainers at them to keep them in, because the cost of generating those people can be significant. And we've got to make sure that we have adequate space to absorb the people that we're training within our country, which is one of the things that hadn't been happening. That's been part of their negotiations. And we've got to make sure that we retain those people by having remuneration that keeps them here. We do have to increase pay and to try and recover the impact that has happened across the board, across all of the public sector. Right. And that was a big part of last year. But when you have exceptional problems, you deal with them exceptionally.
Paul?
I think over the last 18 months, Labour have suddenly realised that it is difficult to govern. I think they came in thinking it was going to be comparatively easy, that they weren't the Conservatives and therefore they're going to get a free hand. West Streeting did give the doctors, resident doctors, above average, above inflation increase with no preconditions around productivity and these kind of things, because they were on strike. They were continually striking. They were quite militant about their approach, exactly, and they still indeed are. The nurses, I know they have taken action, but they are more moderate in their approach. I think the 3.4% that they're looking to get this year is based on the inflation prediction for the coming year. So which is reasonable. I don't think it's a reasonable ask of the resident doctors. That I think they were trying to get 30%. If they keep on pushing the envelope time and time again, frankly, it's going to risk jobs, but it's also going to risk the fact that their tax bill is going to increase, because it is only a finite pot.
Andrew?
I think it's unfair to say doctors were pushing for 30%. What they were arguing...
29.3%.
What they were arguing was 29... Oh, I'm happy to round it up to 30 because it is in that ballpark. What they were arguing, quite rightly, is if you look at what's happened to their pay in real terms, they are now 30% below where they were in 2010. And what they said is, quite reasonably, we want a process that gets us back to where we were in 2010. Not in 1 year. Nobody was ever arguing that they should get that in 1 year. But they were saying, look, let's have a multi-year deal that gets us on a path towards that. And look, the reality is we haven't trained enough doctors for years. That's partly why your government never met its reduced migration to the tens of thousands, because we had to import staff for all the skills gaps we had. And that's true of nurses as well for a long time. So look, nurses definitely deserve more than 3.3%. They are incredibly low paid. And I think, like a lot of public sector workers, their goodwill, because nobody goes into nursing for the money, they do it because it's a vocation. You care about people and you want to help. And that goodwill can often be exploited. It is with teachers and has been at times. It is with nurses, and I'm sure it is with the army as well, as you mentioned, the military more generally, because people see it as a vocation, and that shouldn't be taken for granted. And nurses' pay has been driven down, and they deserve pay restoration as well. But this is going to take time. It's going to be multi-year deals, but it does need to be a path that is consistently above inflation, not necessarily 30% in 1 year. It won't be that, and nobody's expecting that, but they do deserve more pay.
Right. Joseph in Brentwood says, I'm a young person, aged 26, who's struggling to get onto the housing ladder. It is completely impossible, despite living at home with parents, to pay them, keep and save for a deposit. Many graduates I know are also paying additional tax for their student loans and struggling on graduate jobs, which pay them little more than minimum wage. Do you think this is fueling support for reform and the Greens and pushing it away from Keir Starmer's Labour? Relatively brief answers on this, if you would. Paul, let's start with you.
Yeah, absolutely, because people, I think, that don't feel that they've got a stake in society, they're finding it hard to do so, and they're thinking that the status quo isn't working for them. Conservatives have had their chance. They said, OK, they've enough of them. Labour are having their chance. I think that clearly people are saying enough of them. And so they're looking to the polar opposites. They've got the Greens, which are effectively the counterpoint of reform on one side. They're both populist parties. One's populist left, the other's populist right. people are saying, well, let's give them a chance. It's up to the Conservatives and Labour to actually recognise that and actually not just become populist themselves, but actually show themselves as decent, solution-focused and competent.
Well, talking of the Greens, we have Zach Balansky coming into the studio next Wednesday for an hour to take calls from listeners. So that should be interesting. Calvin?
Well, I think this is why we've got to deliver, because people ask, where is the importance? Why is the importance of 1.5 million new homes? And that's because we've got to expand the available housing such that we don't see the price pressures that mean that homes are unaffordable. We have got to make sure that we have apprenticeships so that people have different routes through education. Like we have to make sure that the things that in 5 years' time, and particularly for me, the measure is really in 10 years' time, because it will take some time, that people are actually able to have a meaningful existence with a well-paid job, with a home, a pension, and all of the other things that were considered normal for us. And it won't, the politics and people being upset right now in some ways won't matter if those things have been delivered for them in 5 or 10 years' time. If we get that wrong, we will be out and politics will be materially damaged. This absolutely is about delivery, and this generation, the generational inequalities that have been built up over the last 15 years almost exclusively have to be addressed, and that is the only way, absolutely the only way out of this.
This is a long-term failure, a really long-term failure. There are statistics that show, the Josephs of 20 years ago probably would have been buying a house by now, or 25 years ago, certainly, and they're not now. And the age at which you start a family, the age at which you can buy your first home is getting later and later and later. And this is successive governments. I'm not making a partisan
I was 26 when I bought my first flat.
Yeah, and I was 26 27, I think, when I got a mortgage, which is 20 years ago. And it's much, much harder for the generation coming out of university now or just starting their working career. And that is a complete failure. It's a failure to build council housing because so much of it is in the private rented sector, and we've not regulated rents. There were rent controls under Thatcher. There were fair rent tribunals. We've got a system now where landlords are jacking up. I mean, we talked about nurses getting 3.3%. Most nurses, certainly in London and the South East, will rent. Their rent's going up 5% a year on average. Well above inflation, and they've got to find that out of a salary which is only going up 3.3% or 3.6% last year. So there are pressures on so many people because we haven't sorted housing for it's been totally neglected. It was under New Labour, it was under the coalition and the subsequent governments, and it's, with the best will in the world, I can't see that there's a plan to actually get 1.5 million homes and not of the proportions you need.
I think I'm right in saying that in 2025 it was the lowest number of housing starts.
To be fair, that depends on what happened in 2024 to a large extent. There is a lag in building housing, to be fair.
And we also haven't had the changes in planning and these other things that are necessary in order to get.
But then you're backloading it. You're not going to build 1.5 million, I'm afraid.
Well, I mean, look at the Chancellor today. Look at the figures that were announced today. GDP growth really sluggish in December, which should be a quite upbeat month, 0.1%. And if you break that down, there was a slight growth in manufacturing, no growth in the services sector, and a catastrophic performance in the construction sector. We keep hearing about these 1.5 million new homes, and there's not even spades in the ground. How are people going to? Where are these homes coming from? Really, really, really bad performance in the construction sector. Where is?
But the reason why we've got bad performance in the constructor sector is because we didn't train the people that we need to build, and that's why apprenticeship.
We can go back and back.
But that's why. Well, yeah, but the thing is, these things are the legacy of 14 years of decline.
So where are the new homes coming from?
Underinvestment. We are building them. They are underway.
Where?
We are changing the planning.
Well, no, hold on a second. We had 4 years of Sadiq Khan saying that in London as mayor.
We are changing renters' rights. These things are.
You both know that if two people speak at the same time, people at home can't hear anything. It just sounds like sort of vacant noise. So, Paul, you make your point to Calvin, and then Calvin answers.
We've had this about Sadiq Khan in London. Spent the last 4 years or so or more talking about housing starts, about record housing starts, none of which actually came to, or very few came to much. You can't live in a housing start. You have to live in a house, right? something that's finished. And so it's massaging the figures. You're back-ending. You just said about the fact that you've got to get all these reforms through. There's no way you're going to fulfil your 1.5 million homes because you're just going to run out of time.
Final word to you, Calvin.
I was on an estate in my constituency that they have been trying to regenerate in Leighton Wandsworth. They've been trying to regenerate for years. The consequences of the Liz Truss budget resulted in all of those companies withdrawing from the housing market. It has taken our councils nearly 18 months of support from the national government and from the Mayor of London to be able to bring in some really transformational methods about how we're going to get these things up and running. We need to have targets, and we need to have hope, and we need to get after these things.
No government in history has delivered 300,000 homes a year in British history without a massive chunk of that being council housing. In fact, do you know which Prime Minister built the most housing?
Harold Macmillan.
It was indeed. And a lot of that, I think nearly 40% of it was council housing, because the government has to drive this. If you leave housing to the market, it's not in their interest to drive down prices.
You can do it. It's the only way you can do it, because otherwise you get market distortion.
Believe it or not, I was born when Harold Macmillan was Prime Minister. Just throw that in as an incidental fact. It's 8:49.
You need to be sponsored by whoever.
On the latest episode of The Newsagents.
We'll be asking what Jim Ratcliffe, the Ineos boss, meant when he said the UK had been colonised. Is he wrong? Is he out of his depth? Or has racism just become the new normal?
Get the latest episode of The Newsagents with Emily Maitlis, John Sopel and Lewis Goodall. Listen or watch on our free Global Player app or the LBC app. Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
8:52, Calvin Bailey, Paul Scully, Andrew Fisher and Emma Wolfe with me answering your questions. Here's one from Chris in Stubbington. Hampshire County Council might have to raise council tax by 15% or effectively go bankrupt. Why are so many local authorities in such dire straits? Calvin.
14 years of Conservative. I mean, so there are a number of different aspects to this, but the funding solution that has been given to the councils was broken and needed a fundamental reset. The government's going through and doing that at the moment. It's taken £5 billion worth of pressure off of the councils through the historical send provision. That was something that was just driven past this week on Monday. That was one of the announcements. And so a better funding solution, funding settlement that isn't annualised, will make a significant difference to the council. But there is work to do. I think the announcement that came out on Wednesday was really significant and.
OK. Now, in Hampshire's case, the council has a budget deficit of £136 million. Residents are going to be asked to vote whether to accept a 14.99% increase in council tax in a referendum, which will be held this May. The council has warned that if this proposal is rejected by residents, effective bankruptcy would be unavoidable. Emma Wolfe.
Well, I'm going to do something that politicians never do and say, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. And all I can conclude is it's dire financial mismanagement, because in my local council, you see rubbish collections down, the local schools are all struggling. Libraries are talking about cutting their hours, having days when they are just closed, which to me is heresy. The idea at local libraries, which are not only warm spaces for homeless people, elderly people, lonely people, they're hubs for children to go and do their homework. I mean, we lived in our local libraries when we were young in Camden, and I don't know what I don't know what local councils are doing wrong.
Paul.
I was actually local government finance minister for 5 minutes.
So it's your fault.
When Boris was resigning and the Liz Truss days, I put up two whiteboards in my office. One, because I was also Minister for London, that was all my London stuff there. The other one was to try and come up with a different financing structure for local government. It remained resolutely blank. But because it's too complicated, it's overly complicated. I think the councils that were financially mismanaging have gone bust or are going bust now. I think you're starting to stretch into the ones that are sort of okay run at the moment. Adult social care is the biggest non-discretionary spend that the councils have. I was speaking to a councillor a little while ago for Sussex Council, I can't remember which one. He said that 60% of their budget go on 6% of their constituents. That's totally unsustainable. It's similar to the send issue that Calvin was talking about. So if you're going to talk about local authorities, take that back, take that nationally, and actually and spread it through the country evenly, and then allow the councils to do the truly local stuff.
Andrew?
Look, it's a combination of things. Like all things, it's often not one simple answer. It is budget cuts. I mean, my own council, which has had a 15% increase imposed on it a couple of years ago, Croydon, had its central government funding cut by 70% in real terms over those years. It was given some flexibilities to raise money elsewhere, but you can't cope on that. If anybody had a 70% hit to their income, it would be a problem. The reason that these problems are ongoing, and as Paul says, are kind of creeping into those councils that have generally been okay run, is three things, actually. One is the send thing, which is there's massive rip-offs by the privatised suppliers of transport for kids to get to send schools. It is astonishing how much that is being done. Social care is massively expensive because, again, it's been privatised. You've got private equity funds running a majority of care homes in this country and are making massive profit margins on it. And unfortunately, governments, and again, I'm not being partisan on this, successive governments for decades have failed to tackle the issue of social care. We're an ageing society. Those costs are only going to go up. And until politicians get over themselves, stop making cheap points about it, and actually have basically an NHS-style social care model, we're not going to do it. Councils aren't going to find the money to deal with it. There's no way they can. And often, older people are not evenly spread throughout the country. The pressures are in particular areas. And in my council area, the biggest pressure is not social care, because we're generally a younger population. It's temporary accommodation, because people are being kicked out of their homes because they can't afford the rents, and the councils have a statutory duty to house them. And then they're being put in the hands of these dodgy private landlords in houses in multiple occupation and so on that are not fit for human habitation. It's terrible what we're doing to people.
Right, we've literally got 20 seconds for you to answer this next question, so you've got to promise me to be brief. Rico in Kingsbury, will Labour regret letting 16 and 17-year-olds have the vote? Emma?
I don't think 16 and 17-year-olds are emotionally, politically astute enough. They're not mature enough to vote. They should not be voting.
Paul?
Far too young.
Yeah, they will, because they'll either go Reform or Green.
Calvin?
I think we've got to uphold democracy. We've got to, when people start voting, they continue to vote. We've got to encourage people to engage with the democratic system as early as they possibly can. And this is one of the ways to do it. We have got to really treasure democracy and try and engage the young people as early as we can.
I know it's a novel idea, but parties should do things because they're right, not because it will benefit them personally. But there was polling for ITV today between 18 to... Well, you can hope. There was polling today that was published by ITV, sorry to name another broadcaster, of polling, and they do a tracker on this, from 18 to 24, so not 16 and 17-year-olds, but it probably gives the best indication. 34% will vote Green, 11% Reform. So this idea that Reform and Greens are up the top, not at all actually. Greens are top. Labour was, I think, in the 20s amongst that age group. So it's interesting. It probably won't benefit Labour, but I think it's a good thing to encourage political engagement at a younger age.
And you'll be able to have your say on that in just a minute, because that's what we're going to spend the next hour talking about. But first, our fun question from Gordon in Hampstead. A glowing ball of light, apparently called the sun, has appeared in the skies over Aberdeen. This is supposedly the wettest January in more than a century. What do the panel do to keep their spirits up in winter? Emma.
It has literally rained all year. What I do to stay fun is on the bike with my 5-year-old on the back, we cycle along and we sing songs and we talk about Noah's Ark, and I explain about the flood, and he asks me, why has God sent down this deluge that will never stop? And I explain that we are very, very bad and we are being punished, and one day the sun will come out.
You're a terrible mother.
I am.
What do you sing on the bike?
All sorts of songs. We were singing
Greatest Showman.
Fairy Tale of New York today.
Never enough. No. Paul?
I just channel other spirits, mainly gin.
Okay. Calvin?
I run and just get outside to clear my head and just run and try and imagine that it's not happening to me.
Andrew?
Exercise is very good for mental health, and whether it's exercise indoors or outdoors, I'll leave viewers' or listeners' imagination as to what that could mean. There we are.
Oh, my goodness. Right. Thank you all very much indeed for coming on the panel tonight. Monday's panel includes Reform UK's Head of Local Government Delivery and also former Tory MP and Council Leader Ben Bradley and the Labour councillor and former journalist Sebastian Salek. Right, coming up in the next hour, as promised, we're going to ask you whether you think that Labour are right to lower the voting age to 16 from the next general election. Legislation on that has been introduced today. I used to take the view that this is ridiculous, that if the age of majority is 18, that should be the age for voting. I have changed my mind over the past few years on this. I think it was partly during the Scottish referendum campaign when I saw this debate. There were 6,000 young people in some massive warehouse in Edinburgh, I think it was, and it was the most brilliant debate in the whole campaign, and these were all 16, 17, 18-year-olds. Do you think that Labour are on the right lines here? What do you think the effect on our democracy will be?
On your radio, on the LBC app, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 9 o'clock, a paedophile nursery worker who abused young children in North London has been sentenced to 18 years in prison. 45-year-old Vincent Chan pleaded guilty to 56 offences, with some victims as young as 2 years old. Judge John Dodd Casey, who passed sentence earlier, told him he's made them and their families suffer.
I'm afraid that no sentence this court can pass will cure the hurt that they all feel or address the fears held by the parents as to what you have or might have done to their children.
The nursery and local council say their thoughts are with the victims and families, and they're helping a review. Donald Trump has rolled back a landmark US ruling from 2009 that concluded greenhouse gases are...
From Global, leading Britain's conversation with Iain Dale.
Hello, very good evening. It's 9 on LBC. Well, one of the big news stories of today, and I think it is actually a big news story, is that legislation to allow 16 and 17-year-olds to vote at the next election is beginning its journey through Parliament. The Representation of the People's Bill, which also includes measures to tighten the rules around political donations and protect against foreign interference in elections, was introduced today. Now, meanwhile, the government said a small number of councils in England will test out using locations such as train stations or supermarkets for polling booths in May's local elections to make it easier for people to vote. And they said lowering the voting age, and that won't be for the elections in May, by the way. I think this is for after the Act comes in, so it'll be from the next general election. They said lowering the voting age would engage young people in democracy and ensure their voices are heard. However, opponents of the idea question whether 16-year-olds have enough life experience to vote. Now, they already have the vote in Wales and Scotland, but not for general elections. Now, James Cleverly, the Shadow Local Government Secretary, said the Conservatives are clear that people become adults at 18, and that is when citizenship rights, such as voting, should be gained. Now, the minimum voting age is already 16, as I said, for local elections in Scotland and Wales, as well as elections to the Senate and Scottish Parliament. But for other elections, including to the UK Parliament, local elections in England and all elections in Northern Ireland, it's 18. So the proposals to lower the voting age to 16 across the UK would be the biggest change to the electorate since it was reduced from 21 to 18 in, do you know when that was? 1969, when I was 7. To become law, the bill must be approved by both MPs and peers, a process which can take months, sometimes much longer than months. So people have very strong views on this. And even, I think, a lot of teenagers question whether this is the right thing to do. I remember the last time we talked about this, possibly more than a year ago, I got a succession of 16, 17, 18-year-olds phoning in to say, well, I think I'm adult enough to vote in a general election, but I don't think any of my friends are, which I'm not sure that that's the most convincing argument. I think there is an argument about whether you are considered an adult at 16. I mean, there are things in our society that we can do at 16, but there are plenty of things that we can't. And then you think, well, if we can't do that or can't do this, why should we be able to vote? So really want to hear from all age groups in this over the course of the next hour. And if you are now 13 years old, that means that at the next general election, if it is in 2029, you will be able to have a vote. Do you think that's right? If you are 13 years old, we do need your parents' permission for you to call in, though. 0345 6060 973. Well, let's talk to Aiman Mahmoudou, who is an 18-year-old youth activist who's a member of the steering group for My Life, My Say, a charity which has been campaigning for the voting age to be reduced to 16. I thank you for coming in. Do you understand the arguments that people put against this, saying, well, look, are 16-year-olds really, that interested in politics, knowledgeable about politics, to be able to have a vote?
So I think most of the arguments put against it are also common amongst adults as well. So you often find that there's so many adults who say, actually, you know what, I have friends who will vote, but I won't necessarily vote myself. And I also feel like a lot of the arguments used now are the same arguments that were used again in 1969 when the voting age was extended to women under 21, from 18 to 21. So I think whilst there is some arguments, a lot were again recycled from either the past or can be used against adults as well.
But you could, in 20 years' time, well, you might be sitting here, I certainly won't be, but if you were sitting here in 20 years' time arguing the case for 14-year-olds to have a vote, because, whatever age you pick, whatever the limit is, it's an arbitrary limit. And 18, I think everyone has thought, well, that's a reasonable limit, given that is the age of majority. So if you are proposing 16 now, or you agree with what the government are doing on 16, could you imagine a debate in a few years' time when people say, well, no, we think it needs to be 14?
Well, to be honest, I think there's a very clear line. So 16-year-olds now, they can pay taxes, they can enroll in the army, they can work. So I think there are so many things that affect 16-year-olds that won't necessarily affect 14-year-olds, but the same issues that affect 16-year-olds affect 18-year-olds. I only got involved in the political atmosphere because I was affected by politics that I couldn't necessarily influence. So, and I feel like I'm not the only one. There are so many young people like me who have been kind of affected by decisions that they couldn't influence. So I feel like, there is kind of a line, and there are things that affect 16-year-olds that don't affect 14-year-olds. And I think the time is now, and there's so many things in the media where you constantly see young people overshadowed.
I think the argument about, well, things do affect us. Take, for example, we've been talking on the programme, I think it was last week, about the interest on student loans, which, OK, it's not affecting under 16-year-olds, but it will affect possibly a 16-year-old thinking, well, do I want to go to university? If I'm going to have all of this debt and I'm actually going to end up with a bigger debt after 10 years than I had before because of the interest rate, maybe I should reconsider doing that. So there are plenty of issues that do affect 16-year-olds.
Yeah, and there are big financial issues or financial kind of situations that young people do kind of need to make decisions of now. So I feel like, there are so many things that do impact 16-year-olds, and it's just about being able to give them that voice, and 17-year-olds and 18-year-olds. And actually, if you give 16 and 17-year-olds the vote, in the long term, it's actually proven that they will most likely vote on and on again, and hopefully voter turnout would increase in the future as well.
What percentage of 16 to 18-year-olds do you think would actually take part in a general election?
So I'm not sure of the exact percentage, but again, Scotland and Wales do have 16 and 17-year-olds voting, and the voter turnout amongst 16 to 18-year-olds is higher than the voter turnout between 18 to 24-year-olds. And those 16 to 18-year-olds who are voting are more likely going to vote again and again in the future.
And do you think that this narrative that young people will generally vote for left-wing parties is true? Think about your own friendship circle. Is that reflected in that? Because that was a suspicion as to why they're introducing this, because they think that you'll all vote Labour. I'm not sure that's true now, but when they introduced it, it maybe was.
I think young people have a broad range of political views, and that mainly does come from what affects them. And I feel like young people do kind of vote on issue-based subjects more than the party. I don't think most young people look at a party and necessarily idolize them, but then if they see a policy that they agree with, they can kind of like go into that. And especially now with social media, like young people are so much like they see different parties, they have the opportunity to like kind of explore it, which is something that they didn't necessarily have in the past.
Right, let's go to Dr. Stay with us. Let's talk to Dr. Sebastian Milbank, who's Associate Editor of The Critic magazine, also an academic who specialises in political theology and citizenship. Sebastian, very good evening to you. Now, you're against voting for 16 and 17-year-olds. You've heard Aya put her case. What do you think is the biggest flaw in the case for a change in the law?
Well, I think the biggest flaw is that it confuses capacity with status, by which I mean that many 16-year-olds have the capacity to make adult decisions, but none of them have the status of being an adult, whereas there are many adults who lack the capacity to make adult decisions, lack the capacity to vote, but have the right to. So the point is we don't determine it based on capacity, we actually determine it based on your legal status, whether you're an adult. And 16-year-olds just aren't. Now, if you want to make the argument that 16-year-olds should be treated as adults for criminal purposes, for the purposes of marriage or many number of things they're not allowed to do, then you can make that argument, but we don't.
But they are allowed to do a lot of things that full adults do. And as I said, you pay taxes at 16, you work at 16, you can join the army at 16.
Very few 16-year-olds paying taxes. I mean, I think there needs to be a certain amount of realism. I mean, bear in mind, at the time at which the franchise is more restricted, far more 16-year-olds were effectively engaged in adult activities. Now, the age of maturity is actually much later in real terms. Half the population isn't even in work, it's in university.
So what?
Well, so I'm saying that it's very odd to lower the age of voting at precisely the time that fewer and fewer people are entering the workforce, entering full adult responsibilities. That age is actually later now. So it's quite perverse. And I also think the problem is that if it mattered, if voting was socially transformative as it was in the 19th century, they'd be fighting to stop young people from having it. They wouldn't be encouraging them.
Well, just as we say that 60 is the new 50 or even 40, do you not think that 16 is the new 18? Where I think the arguments against voting at 16 were much stronger 20 years ago than they maybe are now. Because I think young people do grow up just sort of intellectually a lot more quickly now than they used to do. There's all sorts of reasons for that. I think it's partly to do with the internet age that has happened.
Well, I'm sorry to say, I think it's the opposite. I think most people have arrested development because they're addicted to their devices, because they're watching short-form video content. I mean, levels of reading have got worse and worse. I know a lot of people in academia, they report people who are coming to university who are functionally illiterate. I don't think this is a generation that's prepared for political power and office at all.
Oh, you wanted to comment on that?
Yeah, I feel like young people are actually a lot more informed than people think. And firstly, before you didn't have the issue of, for example, tuition fees, which is something that young people have to make the decision now of. And also, young people now are facing, for example, a cost of living crisis where they have no other option but to find economic means for themselves. And it just pushes people into this like world of work. And they face issues that people wouldn't have faced like generations ago. So I feel like to assume that young people kind of are less mature because of social media is just stupid.
I mean, you could argue, Sebastian, that because of the internet, people are much more informed about world issues, about the economy. They consume their news in a very different way to certainly what I did when I was that age. But it is possible to argue that they are better informed generally.
I'm dubious about that way. I mean, there's so much misinformation online apart from anything else, so it's easier than ever to be misinformed. And again, I think
the same for over 18s.
Granted, but I think if we took this issue seriously, we'd have civic lessons in school, we'd be preparing people for public life, for participation in democratic life. We don't do that. I think this actually represents a trivialization of the vote. I think young people should feel insulted by this. They think this is so unimportant, they're going to give it away the vote away to children. I think it's condescending. I wouldn't see it as a victory at all.
When you were at school, what did you have lessons along the lines that Sebastian is talking about? I mean, they certainly, we did in my day, but I mean, I must admit, it wasn't every week that there was something where you would learn about sort of civic issues.
No, I think there's still a call for a civic education. I mean, I'm currently in year 13 now, so I'm doing politics A-level, but without politics A-level, I wouldn't have been kind of aware of these things. But I think this is such a great opportunity. Giving 16 and 17-year-olds the vote is a good opportunity to enforce a political education. And I think nothing else would encourage it as much. So, yeah.
I mean, I think if we were having this discussion in Australia, Sebastian, of course, we would be saying that all 16 and 17-year-olds had to vote because they have compulsory voting there. Now, that isn't that's not part of this bill. And if it was, I would be wholly against the whole thing, I have to say. But does it really, I mean, a lot of young people in this age group, I think, will voluntarily not vote. If they don't feel that they have the knowledge or the beliefs to enable them to vote, they have a choice of not voting.
Yeah, I mean, I think the fact that we have countries now, democratic countries, in which people are forced to vote, tells you how worthless the vote is now considered by both political elites and electorates. If it mattered, if it was really essential, if it changed the fate of countries, it would be highly contested. And with respect to young people, to 16-year-olds, you think about what people used to do to get the vote. People threw themselves in front of horses. They stood up to police. They sent letterbombs through the post. I'm not proving that, but that's a sign of how seriously people were willing to die for the vote. I don't think modern 16-year-olds, most people wouldn't even go out and vote if they were given the chance. That's not the sign of a healthy political society. And I think it's a distraction, this issue of voting for 16. And I think it's a cynical ploy to get a few extra votes on one side of the political spectrum.
Sebastian, thank you. That's Dr. Sebastian Milbank there. Just a final question for you, Aya. We've got all this debate about banning social media for under 16s, or some say under 18s. I mean, if that came in, that actually undermines the case for votes for 16, doesn't it?
So I think, yeah, and that's why I'm not for completely banning social media. I think a blanket ban won't actually necessarily address the actual issues. And I think it would be more beneficial to have maybe some sort of regulation or regulate even the social media companies. More and more we're seeing dangerous companies coming forward. So I don't actually agree with the whole blanket ban, and yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much indeed for getting our debate off to such a good start. That's Aya Mahmood, who is an 18-year-old youth activist. See, I didn't realise you were still at schools. That's why I said that. And she works on the steering group for My Life, My Say, a charity which has been campaigning for the voting age to be reduced to 16. Right, we'll come to your calls in just a couple of moments' time. It's 9:20.
This is LBC.
21 minutes past 9 on LBC. I think this is one of those issues, where there is no right answer. I think we can all have opinions, but none of us can say, I believe 100% that I am right on this. And as I say, my views on this have changed over the years. I'm still not 100% sure that I am right, that the votes should be at 16. But that if I was an MP voting through this bill, I would be voting, well, certainly the 16-year-old element I would vote for. I haven't seen the detail of the other bits of it. But I think I would need a lot of convincing not to. Sal is in Paddington. Hello, Sal.
Good evening. I find it interesting that James Cleverly doesn't think that 16-year-olds should be allowed to vote, given that they are for the leader of the Conservative Party. And that means that over the past couple of years, they've actually had an awful lot of say in who might end up as Prime Minister, more than the rest of the general population, for a start.
Yeah, good point.
We wouldn't have... Do you reckon that we would have sold off as many after-school clubs and activity centres in local councils if young people were allowed to vote? Would the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Service be on its knees quite as much?
Well, you're assuming that every 16-year-old will vote the same way, of course.
Oh, no. But I think that we would actually see politicians...
Listen, Sal, we can't really hear a word you're saying. Your line is incredibly muffled, so we'll see if we can get you back on a better one. Let's go to our old friend Shahid in Hemel Hempstead, who I haven't heard from for a very long time. Hello, Shahid.
Yeah, hi. I'm in favour. I think on the whole it'll be a net positive, but it does come with risks. Now, I've said this a number of times on LBC, not so much to you, but I first started following politics very closely at the age of 14. Fascinating year, 1990. Saddam, like the very first day that I started watching the news closely, Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, and there was all that pressure. And then within a month, Margaret Thatcher was under siege from her own party, and the BBC were doing election or party, leadership elections for about 3 or 4 months, from what I remember. And I followed it closely, and I was ready in 1992 to vote. And I left school in that year, 1992, and you know how torrid those years were. The very bad recession and massive tax increases between 93 and 94, and I had to go through all those 5 long years, the full Parliament, where I didn't have a say apart from the council elections. So I think this is one of the main reasons why it needs to happen, because unlike other things that we can do, or we have to wait till 18. Governments will still be there. They'll be passing laws all the time. And those people that freak out about, oh, no, they're going to be too young, they're acting like it's compulsory. And, everyone's going to be voting automatically. The last election, we had a 60% turnout. Most of the time, it's 70% something turnout. But the most interesting thing is that in Scotland, it has been in place since 2014. And I just started looking it up while I was waiting to get on. And if I read the numbers correctly, 1 million young people did vote in the referendum, more than 10 years ago now, and most of them voted for. So I think it will lead. What will lead to?
Sorry, did you say that 16-year-olds could vote in the 2014 referendum?
That's what it says on the BBC link.
We'll check that, but I'm pretty sure that's not right. I think the voting for 16-year-olds came in after that. But again, I'm not 100% sure I'm right on that, but Chris is going to check that.
Yeah. Okay, but what I think it will lead to over time is that the politicians will have to up their game, because what will happen is that the young people will start voting. They're going to start demanding more for their votes, like they should, and then because at the moment, if you are between 16 to 18. And there's a general election, you could be waiting up until the age of 23. I was 21 in the year 1997 when I got my first vote.
Me. I was 21 when I voted in 1983. Or was I? Yeah, I was 21. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's too long. But if you're lucky enough, if you happen to be 16 in a general election and you get that chance to vote, and you can influence the local, MP if it's in a marginal seat, and you get your housing quicker. And look at Scotland. They've got elections coming up. Look how close it is. It's like a 3-horse race between SNP, Reform. Labour could still row back some of their current losses. Like 2 years ago, Labour were in the lead, and now they're down to third. I think that's a net positive. And what will happen whenever it comes into law is that we're going to have at least 6 weeks of election campaigning where everyone's going to get scrutinised. The likes of Farage are going to have to justify their policies. Labour will have to, come out with more. So are the Tories. I think it'll be a net positive, but it does come with risks because of all these TikToks and Instagrams and all these Snapchats. There is a danger of misinformation influencing those that don't follow politics. But I used to do taxi driving up until 2020. I was driving on the nights of the 2015 election, the 2017 election, and I drove quite a lot of adults in the Hemel generally is a marginal seat. And I was driving quite a lot of people well into their 20s saying, I didn't vote because I didn't feel like I knew about it. So the point there is, if they don't feel like they know enough, they don't have to vote. So all those people freaking out saying they're too young, they don't know what they're doing, there's no guarantee that they are going to vote. But if they feel strongly enough to vote, and the fact that it could be a 5-year parliament, why deny them it? Because they are going to be affected by these laws, aren't they, regardless?
Shahid, I have some shocking news for you. You were right and I was wrong.
Okay, no problem. So it's a good example. Let's get some. I hope it's up to you, but it'd be nice to hear some Scottish callers. Are they?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, you should be a radio presenter. That is a very good idea. If you live in Scotland and Wales, how is this working in your two countries? Because it's going to come in England as well. Right, Sal is hopefully back on a better line. Sal,
can you hear me now?
Yes.
So the other thing is, unlike you, I actually think that people should have to at least register. Whether they actually vote for a party or not, I actually think that we have diluted, because we've diluted. Every person that doesn't vote basically gives away their agency, and it increases the agency of those who do vote. And by action, would we still see the triple lock if younger people could vote, I wonder, because
Sorry, what you said was, or the way I interpreted it was, that we all had to divulge our political views, who we vote for. But
no,
right. So you're just talking about people should have to vote compulsorily,
or should at least, even if it is reopen nominations or none of the above, because at least we then know whether it's the fact that people aren't interested because there is nothing there that engages with them, or whether it's genuine disaffection with the system. Because by basically, the more that people disengage with democracy, the more it is possible for people to turn around and say that democracy doesn't matter because it doesn't represent an ever-growing majority. If you at least have to, even if it's spoil your ballot, right, it means that we can at least understand what is going on with politics.
Yes, but I don't think it should be made compulsory, because there are so many things that we're made to do in our society now. Do we really want to add another one where if you want to spoil your ballot paper, go down to the polling station and do it anyway? No one should have to force you to do it.
Or post it in.
Yeah, fine. But don't add another law making us do things that because if you bring in a law saying it is compulsorily for everyone to vote like they do in Australia, there has to be a penalty for not doing it. Do we really want to fine people, I don't know, 10 quid, 50 quid, whatever it would be, for not registering a vote? I don't want to live in a country that does
Not
that.
about that, but perhaps 10 to 15 hours of community service in the local community might do.
Yeah, that'd be a popular one.
Well, because voting is as much a social duty, I think.
Yes.
It is, because it impacts. Our politicians impact every aspect of our life, whether we like it or not, unfortunately, right? And it does basically mean that you give greater weight and agency to those who do vote in a matter that skews areas of national concern.
See, I'm sure that most people who phone into LBC do vote, because if you take the time to make a phone call to LBC on a political issue, the chances are you're interested in politics. But I mean, there are some times when I'm very tempted to say, did you vote at the last election? Because if you didn't, frankly, you haven't got a right to an opinion.
And that is the other aspect of it, which is there are plenty of people who will complain about the decisions that are made, and yet when you actually ask them, well, did you go out and vote? Do you know what the differences are in manifestos and the rest of it? And, the majority of people still think that they're voting for the Prime Minister as opposed to only voting for their local MP. We don't actually, I think this could be a way of increasing the knowledge in the general population of how our politics works, which is desperately needed, especially as we're going into such a more complicated time with, as people have said, disinformation, so on and so forth. It does not mean that politicians are going to try and win votes by handing out PlayStations, other consoles are available, but we need to understand that if people want the future generations to engage, they need to actually believe and be listened to.
Okay, Sal, thank you very much. Michael has given what he thinks is a winning argument here. I think it's the opposite. He says, if everyone legally had to vote in the Brexit referendum, we would not have left the EU. An excellent argument against compulsory voting, I would say, though I think you're actually on the wrong track there. I think if there had been, I think there would have been such a rebellion to it that I think more people would have voted to leave the EU. But we'll put that one aside, Michael. More of your calls to come. Do you think the government is right to introduce votes for 16 and 17-year-olds? It's 9:32, news headlines on LBC with Darryl Jackson.
A paedophile nursery worker who abused young children in North London has been sentenced to 18 years in prison. 45-year-old Vincent Chan pleaded guilty to 56 offences, with some victims as young as 2 years old. The US President Donald Trump is terminating a landmark US ruling from 2009 that concluded greenhouse gases are a threat to public health. It became the legal bedrock of federal efforts to rein in emissions, especially in vehicles. And Sir Jim Ratcliffe has said sorry if his comments about migrants in Britain offended some people. The Prime Minister called on the co-owner of Manchester United to apologise. LBC weather: cloudy for most with outbreaks of rain tonight. Cold in Scotland with clear spells and snow showers moving into the north and east. A low of -3.
This is LBC.
Octopus
Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
9:35, if you've just tuned in, we're talking about votes at 16 and 17, which is one of those subjects that I must have covered, I don't know, in the last 15 years, probably about 20 times. And sometimes you don't really think that you're hearing any original arguments. But I think we have tonight so far, and from our guests and indeed Sal, I think, put forward some very good, interesting views there. Right, let's go to more calls. Steve is in East Grinstead. Hi, Steve.
Hi, Ian.
What would you like to say?
My view is that I've got a son who's 18 years old now. When he was 16, he was very different to what he is now. He was in a pupil referral unit in Tunbridge Wells and was full of testosterone, fighting. Now he's getting straight A's at A-level. So I think that the difference between 16 and 18 is massive in terms of mental maturity.
I think that is probably true for quite a lot of people. Whether it's true for everybody, I mean, whatever the age is, there are always going to be some people who are more mature than others. I mean, there are 25-year-olds who maybe aren't as mature as some 20-year-olds. So there's always going to be that issue. I suppose the question is, the 16-year-olds who are reasonably mature, should they be penalised for the fact that other 16-year-olds aren't?
I mean, that's a very good point, but I mean, I'm watching Lord of the Flies at the moment, and I went to private school and understand how...
Oh, I bet that brings back memories.
Yeah, no, of course it does. But, how boys can be boys. And I think it's more for boys than girls, and I have a daughter as well. But I think boys, with the testosterone that hits them, I think they can be influenced by people like Andrew Tate, go more extreme right wing, which he was and now isn't, and I think the fluctuation in terms of your affiliation to different parties and different ways of thinking is massive in that 2 years, which is unfair to then skew the voting pattern that way.
Do you think that in general, and we can only talk in generalities here, I suppose, but in general, 16-year-olds are more open to being influenced by people that maybe we wouldn't want them to be influenced by?
100%, because they're totally influenced by social media.
Yeah.
My daughter is as well, but she...
But then aren't you and I?
No, my social media channels aren't, they're how to cook a steak, how to play golf. They're not Andrew Tate.
Well, no, I have to say Andrew Tate has never appeared on my Instagram reels. But, in general, sort of algorithms do throw a lot of things at you, and you make your own judgment as to whether you believe them or not. I mean, I keep getting lots of dog videos on my feed, and I'm thinking, well, how come that person happened to have their camera ready just at that particular moment? And you're thinking, well, no, this is all staged. But I mean, I'm adult enough to work that out for myself. But the political equivalent of that, I do worry about younger people being taken in.
You use that word there, right there. You're adult enough, which kind of puts the point on the point, which is you can make that choice to walk away and not get consumed by it. And I come back to sort of Lord of the Flies and sort of being a private school, but some horrific things happened at private school, not to me, but I saw some pretty dark things happening between boys who were influenced by the Klan.
The Klan? What's that?
Just a group of people who decide to be led astray.
Right.
It's like herd mentality.
But you see, I would argue that is possibly more prevalent the younger you are, But it still happens with people in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. There are some people who will always be more easily influenced. Steve, thank you very much. Lorraine says, my son's first vote was in the 2014 referendum, aged 16. He and all his friends went to hustings and in some cases changed their votes. They were very engaged and took it very seriously. It's fantastic, says Lorraine. Well, thanks for that bit of feedback, Lorraine. I mean, look, I'm sure there'll be people who have a different perspective, but very good to hear from you. Daz is in Shrewsbury. Hello, Daz.
Hello, Ian. I like your show.
Thank you.
This is your first speaker. I just want to put. She was disingenuous when she said you can join the army.
Well, you can.
16. You can, but you can't fight.
Well, yeah, but she was right. She wasn't disingenuous. She was stating a fact.
If you were going to war or conflict, they will remove you because otherwise you're a child soldier.
Well, you wouldn't be on the front line, but you would still be working in the army. So I hope you'll agree that she wasn't being disingenuous.
Well, yes, you can join the army, but you will never see conflict until you're over 18.
Absolutely, that's right. But she didn't deny that.
But if you're voting at 16, you voted whichever Labour or Conservative in, and they decide they're going to have an armed conflict. Well, maybe they should be going. Because, that's what they're voting for, that party. I just think it's disingenuous to say you can join the army.
Well, it wasn't disingenuous. She didn't say anything about fighting age. She said you can join the army at 16, and that is a fact, is it not?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. So she wasn't being disingenuous.
We need to sort of emphasise the fact that they are not allowed to fight until...
Well, you can emphasise it in the way that you like. She didn't need to because she wasn't talking about fighting age. She was talking about whether you're allowed to join the army. So don't go around accusing people of being disingenuous when they weren't being.
Okay, I'll take that as
a
hit. But I just think, I saw people removed from the ships and other places when we went into conflict because they were underage.
Fine. I'm not arguing with you. I know that that is a fact that I know as well. But she wasn't saying anything about that, so it's a bit of a moot point. Shall we move on? Have you got another point to make?
No, that was it, really.
Okay.
I just wanted to make sure that people understood that, yes, they can join, but they can't fight for us.
All right, Daz, thank you. Keith is in Upminster. Hello, Keith.
Hello again, Ian. 2 or 3 years ago, or probably longer than that, I thought about the compulsory voting, and I think people should be on the electoral roll. I think they are on the electoral roll from the age of 16 or 16 and a half, something like that. And if they haven't voted by the time they get to 30, say 31, 32, maybe if there's a long break between general elections, then they should be removed from the electoral roll. And that would affect their eligibility for credit and many other things. So if somebody's had 14 years to attempt to vote, they've probably gone through at least 3 or 4 elections by that point. If they haven't voted by the time they get to 30, 32, something like that, then take them off the electoral roll, and that will have a lot of other impacts on their eligibility for other things.
Do you really want to live in a country that does that? I mean, that's fundamentally against your own democratic freedoms to do that. Well, people have a freedom not to vote.
They could probably reapply to go back on it, even if they go. I mean,
well, why introduce more bureaucracy?
Because at the moment we have a really abysmal turnout on most elections.
And you think stopping people from voting would increase turnout?
I wouldn't stop them immediately. We'd give them. It probably when they got 1 or 2, when they say had missed 5 or 6 or 3 or 4 elections, it'd give them say, if you haven't voted in the next one or two, in one of the next elections, unless you've got a really good reason why you couldn't go and vote or couldn't vote by post, then take them off the electoral roll.
Well, I'm going to be completely honest, and I think that's the most stupid suggestion I've ever heard in terms of voting laws, because how does that encourage anyone to take part in the democratic process? It doesn't. It's yet another penalty to people that have actually done nothing apart from not turned up to vote.
No, they haven't turned up to vote 5 or 6 times, not just once. If they haven't turned up to vote 5 or 6 times.
But Democracy is a weird thing, but the one thing that surely if you have a democracy, you've got to allow everybody to take part in it, and it's their choice as to whether they take part in it. People should not be compelled to.
Oh yeah, they've skipped. If you skip one or two elections,
I mean, what if you live in a constituency and you've lived there all your life, and for election after election, you look at the candidates or you look at the parties and you think, well, a plague on all their houses, I can't vote for any of them, and you want to make them vote for somebody that they don't want to. That's not democratic.
No, where I live, I'm next door to Andrew Rosendale's seat in Upminster.
Well, you've got a good choice for the next election, then, haven't you?
But Upminster always goes to. Upminster's been Tory for about 25 years at least.
And?
I haven't voted for Tory every time. I have once or twice. I voted for Boris Johnson for the London mayor, but I haven't voted every time for the same party.
And how's that relevant to our discussion?
Well, I'm in one of those safe Tory seats, and there are not many of them around still.
Yeah, but all you're proving is that every vote counts, and that's an encouragement for people to vote. But you're ignoring my suggestion that you could live in a constituency where all the candidates were people that you thought were useless. All of the parties had platforms that you didn't agree with, and you're saying that you should still be forced to vote for one of them.
Then go down to your polling station and spoil your ballot, or vote, say, none of the above, or something like that.
Yeah, but the slippery slope that you would be on is the slippery slope that you're actually on is saying, well, if people don't vote in particular elections, then they should be taken off the electoral roll. But the next stage of that,
temporarily,
the next stage of that is saying, well, if you don't vote for one of the parties, then you're taken off the electoral roll.
Maybe not take them off permanently, but take them off for 5 years or something like that.
So you want to employ another couple of people in each local council to police that, do you?
Yeah, why not?
Yeah? Well, I'll tell you why not. Because that would put £100,000 on the council tax bill. And if you want to pay a lot more council tax for this ridiculous idea, well, good on you.
Okay, thanks, Ian. Well, that was my idea anyway.
Oh, dear, that's two callers. I think I've a bit demolished, but I think they deserved it, don't you? It's 9:47.
Coming up at 10 on LBC, Ben Kentish.
As Donald Trump gets the go-ahead to sue the BBC for $10 billion, shouldn't our government be doing more to stand up for British taxpayers? Plus, is the school summer holiday about to be scrapped?
Ben Kentish at 10. Listen, Dale on LBC.
9:49. Millie says, I teach kids of this age. Yes, there are a very, very small minority who might be capable. The majority are not capable of remembering to bring their book to school, let alone know enough to make an educated decision about the country. What does that say about your teaching, Millie? Sorry, that was a flippant remark, but you see what I mean. I mean, I agree. There are obviously lots of 16-year-olds that wouldn't be capable of voting, but you could say there are lots of 18-year-olds in exactly the same position. And I think we do have to look at the experience of Scotland and Wales. And we have a call from Wales. Josh is in Neath. Hello, Josh.
Shemai. Hello, Ian. How's it going?
I beg your pardon. What did you say?
Oh, hello in Welsh. Yes, I'm from Wales, and I'm just old enough to have experienced voting at 16, and as well as being able to see those who were robbed of an ability to vote at 16, with, for instance, with Brexit, something that would impact them the rest of their political lives. But the thing I'd like to point out is, well, it's been a good success in Wales. I mean, the reports... They say it is hard to research into the full impact of voting at 16, but there's been massive levels of political engagement from 16 and 17-year-olds, where the studies show that those who showed an interest followed through into voting, where I also don't hold the argument that the youth are more influential or more influenced, especially when the baby boomer generation has experienced every type of propaganda ever experienced. And look how they vote statistically. I'd also like to add the matter of youth services tend to be the first cut from council budgets across the UK. And is it any correlation that they don't vote, of which they're able to be cut, whereas pensioner services and the triple lock are able to be maintained? And isn't it peculiar how they're able to vote?
Well, I can absolutely see the logic of your argument there. I mean, I don't know if you know the answer to this, but what has been the experience of turnout of 16 to 18-year-olds in elections where they've been held in Wales?
Looking at the report from Cardiff University, it states about approximately 26% of 16 to 17-year-olds who participated in the Welsh election study reported that they'd followed through in voting. But admittedly, it's statistically small and relatively non-impactful. So it becomes the question of we're just preventing people having a say for the sake of them not having a say with no justified reasons, where you've covered previous topics of you can go to the army, you can get married. There's a range of things of which you can do at 16, but you can't have your say politically.
I'm coming down to Cardiff on the 25th to speak to broadcast journalism students at Cardiff University, and we're...
Oh.
Shall I let the cat? No. I could have let a cat out of the bag then, but I got a very big shake of the head from Chris. But anyway, Josh, thank you very much indeed. Let's go to Kevin in Oxford. Hello, Kevin.
Yeah, hi, Ian. Yeah, I think it's slightly too young to have a vote at 16. I mean, it's quite amusing that, you know, at 16 you can vote, but you can't frequent a public house and have half a shandy because your mental aptitude is obviously not, you know, you can't physically and mentally do that, you know. So I'm not sure that really works, you know, with the theory. And also, would you be easily groomed by your family and your peers to vote which way they do? I think it's a postcode lottery. I think if you live in a really working class area that are downtrodden possibly and very broke, you might vote a certain way. If you live in Chelsea, or London, you might vote a different way. So I'm not so sure. Grooming, I mean, you know, I can remember the outcry with Shemima Begum saying she was groomed to go over to join ISIS, and she was just a couple of months off 16. So I don't know, Ian. I'm not so sure that it's the right age. What do you think?
Well, I think in terms of, I mean, I hate that word grooming because it's probably inappropriate to use it in this context because we know what it's normally used for. Obviously, there will be families who voted a particular way all down the generations, but I think that attitude is dying out. I mean, my grandfather, I'm told, in the 1951 general election, locked my grandmother in the toilet for the whole day so she couldn't go out and vote Liberal.
No, quite right. Anyone who votes Liberal should be locked in the toilet all the time.
And I mean, I've knocked on enough doors when I've been out campaigning in previous years where I know you get people, oh, we're all Labour here, or we all vote Tory in this household, and you think, well, haven't you got a mind of your own?
Ian, just answer me this very briefly, if you would. How do you define not being mature and able enough to go and have a half a shandy in a pub unaccompanied at 16 and you can vote? How do you define that?
No, I think it's a quite reasonable point of view. I think if this goes through, and it will go through, I think there will be a much wider debate on all of the other things that we should be allowed to do at 16. I mean, why is it we can drive at 17 rather than 16 or 18? I mean, that's a complete anomaly, isn't it? You're right about the drinking age. I mean, in America, it's still 21. I mean, there are lots of people who actually would put the age of majority back up to 21 from 18 in all sorts of different ways. But I think in the 21st century, we need to have a degree of consistency in these things. So if we're going to make voting at 16 and other things at 16, then everything should be at 16 and just accept that time, as generations go on, things change, and 16-year-olds generally now, you could argue, are more mature than they were 20 or 30 years ago. You could argue that. Kevin, thank you. Paul's in Liverpool. Paul, hi.
Hi, Ian. You're okay, mate?
Yes, indeed. What would you like to say?
So, Ian, with regard to the voting, I'm 58. I've never voted in my life, and that was as a result of when Liverpool was put into a managed decline by Margaret Thatcher's government from 1979 onwards.
Well, even if I accepted your description of that, which I do not, because Michael Heseltine tried to arrest that decline, why on earth would you not use your vote to make sure that decline didn't happen?
Because I've got no faith in any of them, even Labour now. I've got no faith in them. Every one of them in the last few years has let us down in one way or another. When we had the actual COVID, how many lies were told there? How many people, were taken out of the government for wrongdoing or dishonesty? So why do I want these people? I'm a successful man in my own right. The last guy who said you should be taken off the electoral roll, I wouldn't care. I've already made my money. I employed 15 people. I had to go on that. I followed Margaret Thatcher. When I was 18, they had that thing on your bike. A third of the men who were working age, if they wanted the job, we had to travel to London and live in bedsit. And I made my money there, and I came back and invested it back in Liverpool. With regards to the 16-year-olds voting, I think they should be able to vote if they want.
Well, you don't have any right to an opinion, given that you don't vote yourself.
Well, if they want to vote, they can, because it's their future, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it was your future as well, and you decided not to vote, so you negated any interest in it.
Future, Ian, I'm a multi-millionaire.
Well, lucky you.
Yeah, I employ people. I have several properties. I've done well out of life, not because of the government, but because of my own determination and grit.
Well, you could argue that it was because of governments that actually gave you the opportunity to make money, and you took full advantage of that, but you don't seem very grateful for it, Paul. Thank you very much indeed. Well, thanks for all of your calls and messages this evening and throughout this week. I'll be back on Monday from 7. If you missed any of this evening's show, you can listen back on our free Global Player app or the LBC app, where you can stay up to date with all the latest news, videos and opinion. Download the official LBC app for free from your app store now. And don't forget, there's a new episode of Where Politics Meets History podcast coming your way at 1 o'clock in the morning. Coming up at 1 on LBC, it's Clive Ball. But right now, Ben Kentish.
Ian, thank you very, very much.